Hello, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV, and today is Tuesday, April 14th. Welcome to our show. I hope everyone enjoyed yesterday's show. I know we've already gotten some feedback on the work from home fitness video by our own Jeremy Jones. So what we've done here is we have broken that off as a separate download. And if you go to TechStrong.tv, and scroll down, you'll see that we've started a section now, and we'll have these, as Jeremy does them 2 to 3 times a week. We'll put them up there as well as working them into the TechStrong show. I think it's going to, I find it really valuable and useful. I hope you guys do too. But do check it out. That's on TechStrong.tv. Speaking of checking out, please join our Slack channel, TechStrongTV.slack.com. And again, if you go to TechStrong.tv, you can actually get an invite to the Slack channel. With that being said, let me tell you a little bit of what we have in store for today. A little bit of the new and a little bit of the old. First of all, I have a friend of mine from the security world who I've known for years and years, Andrew Hay, who's with LaRes Consulting, one of the leading penetration testing cyber consulting firms in the world. And Andrew's been an author. He's an author. He's been an analyst, a CISO consultant for a long time. And Andrew and I had a really good talk. LaRes just put out a report on the top 10 penetration testing findings. And we got into that as well as security in general. I think you'll find it a good one. And then reaching back a little bit, we pulled out a video I did, it's probably 2 years ago already, with my friend John Willis, Damon Edwards, and Cornelia Davis. From over in one of the DevOps Enterprise Summits. Check that out if you can. Then we're going to turn things over to my digital Anarchist co-founder partner, John Willis. And John has a good piece he's been working on. I think you'll find that very interesting. Then I'll be back for the news. Then we have Charlene O'Hanlon has a great interview set up with Tom Patterson, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Unisys. And then we'll turn things over to Mitchell. And Mitchell has 2 segments for today. One will be what will an economic recovery look like in a world in which rich data, like we've never seen before. So he'll be touching on that. And then Mitchell did an interview with Rick Fitz, Splunk SVP GM IT Market Group, about the launch of Splunk's Remote Work Insights product. And we'll be talking more about that in the news as well. And then I'll be back to close things up. So it sounds like a great Tuesday lineup. I hope you'll enjoy it. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with our first interview.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel, and we're back here in the TechStrong TV studio. As I mentioned, our first interview today is with a friend of mine from the cyber world. I know Andrew probably 15 years or so, and in that time he's been an author, a CISO, a security consultant, VP strategies and stuff like that. Andrew's just really bright guy who's really climbed the ladder in the cyber industry. He now works at LaRes Consulting, which is one of the premier penetration testing firms in the world. My friend Chris Nickerson's one of the co-founders there, and Chris is also a pretty well-known personality in the cyberspace, in the cyber world. Anyway, Lares recently came out with a report, Top 10 Findings on Penetration Testing, and I had a chance to talk about that with Andrew, as well as security in general. And, you know, I had to cut this interview off after about 20 minutes, a little more. But Andrew and I probably could have spoken all day, and I would have found it very interesting. I'm not sure if you would have. But anyway, here's my fan Andrew Hay from Lares Consulting, and we'll be back after.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV, and I'm really happy to introduce our next guest for this segment. He's someone that I've known 15 plus years in the information security, as we call it now, cybersecurity industry. And during that time, I've known Andrew as an author, an analyst, a security researcher, a security company executive. He's worn many hats. My favorite hat, though, is, every year, also maybe for the last 14, 15 years, we've run something called the Security Bloggers Meetup at the RSA conference every year. Andrew is always a fixture there, and kind of the definitive picture of our Security Bloggers Meetup every year is what we call the Bald Security Bloggers picture, and Andrew is always front and center in that one. When we first started the Security Bloggers Meetup, I didn't consider myself part of the Bald Security Bloggers Network, but as the years have gone by, I've edged closer and closer to being in that picture. But it is what it is. Anyway, with that said, let me introduce you to Andrew Hay of Lares Consulting. Andrew, welcome.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, Andrew, I think I kind of gave a good glimpse of your career in information security there. Did I leave out anything?
I don't think so. I've been an industry analyst, researcher, worked at a bank in Bermuda, kind of lived and worked all over. Like you said, wore a lot of different hats over the years.
Absolutely. And written several books, right?
I think the count is at 4 now. Yeah. 4. That's where it's stopping. I'm not writing anymore.
I look, we do what we can. So, Andrew, I think you're the first time we've interviewed anyone from Lares on either Security Boulevard or certainly on TechStrong TV. We're only doing this now. This is our 3rd week. But why don't you give us a little background on Lares?
Sure. So we've been around for a little more than 13 years. We focus primarily on penetration testing. So a lot of offensive, defensive, red teaming, purple teaming, blue teaming support, but we also do virtual CISO services. So we're marrying the executive side with the in the trenches fixing side, and it's been working out pretty well for us over the years. We end up doing, more than probably more than 300 different engagements a year all over the world. And just busy.
Absolutely. And of course, in addition to yourself, I do have a few other friends. They're at Lares. Jessica Archer is not an old friend. I've known her a long time. She's not that old. And then, of course, Chris Nickerson is the CEO. And I know Chris from my days in Boulder and Colorado and stuff like that, going back a long time as well, 15, 20 years. But you guys do have quite a lineup of some very, very talented, distinguished security folks there. And, I could see why you would have that many kinds of engagements going on.
Yeah, well, we pride ourselves on not hiring just fresh out of school people. We're hiring people with 8 years experience that have been doing this day after day and year after year. So we're not in the business of swapping out or doing the whole switcheroo when you get the 15-year veteran and then you get the 2-month-old I've never done this before person in there doing the testing. So we definitely balance that fairly well.
Excellent.
I'd say.
Yep. So Andrew, we're going to jump into a report that you guys have recently put out. But before we do, I realize our audience is a mix of cybersecurity folks, dev and DevOps folks, cloud native, Kubernetes kind of stuff, QA, and general IT people. Not everyone, I think everyone is at least familiar with penetration testing. But when we start talking about red team, blue team, purple team kind of activity, my non-cyber and InfoSec friends may not be familiar. Why don't we just lay that down? What do we mean when we say red and blue team and now purple team?
Sure. So if you think of offensive security operations like penetration testing, social engineering, physical security or physical access to an organization, that falls under the scope of red teaming, where it's that converged attack methodology. On the flip side, you've got the blue team, and those are traditionally the defenders, the people that are sitting there monitoring the logs, building the defenses, making sure that the mitigations are in place to prevent both the red team and actual attackers that are out on the internet from getting into the organization. So when you marry those two together, red and blue, not only with the teams, but the colors themselves, you get purple. So the purple team is a hybrid of red team and blue team, where the attackers, like the red team testers, are working closely with the blue team defenders to make sure not only that they are catching the attacks and the methodologies, but helping refine and tune the systems within the organization so that should an event like this happen in the future, they know how to prepare for it. They have a playbook and a call list to go down. So it's taking those real world incidents, replaying them, and also training the organization and the team members how to respond to them in a timely manner and repeatable manner. That's the key, the repeatable aspect.
Absolutely. Andrew, thanks so much. I think a lot of people listen, and even maybe some security folks who don't deal with, that aspect of security, and they hear the terms red team, blue team, purple team now, and they're almost afraid to ask because they don't want to sound dumb, right?
And it's one of those where there are handfuls of terms that have been really synonymous with penetration testing and just security testing in general. And I think you're right. I think people are afraid, if they don't know the answer, to say, oh yeah, red, yeah, I know exactly what that is. And I talk to individuals all the time that come to us and say, we need red team. And after talking with them, they just mean penetration testing. They don't want physical. They don't want social.
No, you know what, Andrew? I've heard people refer to red team, and from what they describe, it's almost synonymous with what I would call a tiger team, which is, you bring in some experts who are going to maybe troubleshoot, or it's more than penetration testing. It's a tiger team. I have a particular hotspot. I need you guys. We're going to bring in the experts here, and so it is a somewhat misunderstood term, and especially when you look at how quickly security is growing and how other disciplines have to embrace security as part of what they do, which is certainly the case in DevOps. You get misunderstandings. Anyway,
think back to cloud security. People always, when cloud security first came out, they thought that meant encryption at rest and encryption in transit. That was all that cloud security meant at the time. At one of my jobs, I spent a good year and a half trying to educate people that no, there's more to cloud security than just encryption. And they'd have none of it. They're like, no, these vendors tell us that's what cloud security is. All right, that's adorable. Let's have a talk about this. And get the root of this,
to say the least. Yeah, we've lived through that too. So, Andrew, I wanted to the genesis of our arranging this interview was a report that you guys put out on top 10 findings from penetration tests. Was it over the last year, or what was the time frame?
2019.
Okay, so last year's top 10 on penetration testing. And And again, I'm assuming most people, penetration testing is a little easier, right? It's that hacker's eye view of coming into your network. It can be both physical as well as cyber type of stuff, right? And it's a lot of fun. I over the years, though I've never done that kind of thing, I've had a lot of friends who were in that business, and they always have great war stories. So it's all, especially over drinks, the more they drink, the better the war stories get. Or the more I drink, I don't know. But anyway, Andrew, why don't we, there's drinking involved for sure. So, Andrew, let's go through this top 10 though, and see if anyone out here kind of sees anything that may help them.
Yeah. So the whole idea for the report itself was when I started with Lara's last, I would say March, April, May, I can't remember. We got to the executive team got to talking and say, well, where's the data around the penetration tests and the types of penetration tests? And the response is, well, we have all that data, but no one wants it or has asked for it. And then you think back to something like the Verizon DBIR that people are just frothing at the mouth to get because they want that data. They want to see what's happening. We came up with the idea of putting together the top 10 list of methods that our testers are using in our engagements that will help them really get to the goal of facilitated access, to get a shell on a system, to prove that there are vulnerabilities and exploits available for a discovered vulnerability. And we wanted to present it in a way that you could map it to, not only saying here are all the problems, but also giving people the mitigations and how to monitor for these types of techniques. And in many cases, tying it back to the MITRE attack framework, because that seems to be the common language that everyone's talking right now when it comes to attacks, and taking that information and giving a succinct report that people could sit down and read. Some of the findings, like the first one, was brute forcing attacks or brute forcing accounts with easily guessable and easy to find passwords. Brute forcing has been around forever. We're taking a list of common phrases and terms and just throwing them at the accounts until we get in. That hasn't gone away. It's not going to go away, but people are still using easy to guess passwords, either based on kids' names, the organization name, their pets' names, because it's things that we as humans can think about. And that's really where two-factor authentication can come in and help, more stringent password requirements. Some of the others are on here, like excessive file permissions on an actual system. So a lot of people will get a laptop or have their account created, and they have way more permissions and ability to access things than they really should. And that's a failing of our ability to fail to plan, because when we're rolling out these rules and restrictions from a technology perspective, we're not going back to our security program and following that least privilege model and helping that trickle down to the actual end users. So giving people too much access is just, it continues to allow us to move from system to system and file to file when we're conducting these pen tests.
Andrew, let's stop there. Let's take a look at both of these before we go on, if you don't mind. So, look, passwords have been a problem for as long as there's been passwords, right? Every year, how many people use password one as their password, or just password as their password, or their wife's name, their husband's name, their kid's name, their pet's name, as you mentioned. The other thing that I think, I don't know, again, because our audience isn't all security folks, and not all security folks may not know as much as we think they know, or they think they know, is that, there are lots of tools, password spraying and stuff like that, where, look, once I could get to an access prompt, and I could run a program that will brute force your password like this, right? Well, they're just going to, I don't know password or permutations per minute or whatever that they'll try, but given a few hours or or longer, they will crack your password. And this is why it's important to have sort of, hey, I know it's a pain in the butt, but if you entered the wrong password 3 times, 5 times, whatever it is, you're locked out, right? And you can't just keep trying and like spinning a one-armed bandit in Vegas or something. So that's a huge thing. On the other hand, I got to tell you personally, right? So I turn on multi-factor a lot, and I use authentication on a lot of the apps and SaaS and stuff that I use. But when I get that dreaded message to go to Google Authenticator or Facebook and look up my authentication code, I just had it with Apple the other day. It's like, we need a better, especially when you're on your phone and now you gotta, because you can't just like multi-window in a phone, right? You gotta close, swipe that one up, open up another one, copy paste that. Dude, we need a better way. If we want people to stop using passwords, I've come to the conclusion over the years that just sitting up here and railing about don't use the same password on multiple sites, don't use simple passwords, don't use people's names or common names, use phrases. All the usual stuff, Andrew, that in the security industry we've been, evangelizing for years. It don't work. People don't care. So we've got to come up with, something that's easier for people. And until we do, I think we're just gonna keep having that.
Well, and to that end, my parents have a book that is the password book, and you see these being sold in stores all over the place now, and it just, I get chills when I see that, because I think people see that and like, oh, this is exactly what I need.
What a great idea. I once had a good friend of mine who's a very well-known VC, actually. He was away, and his dad called me that he thinks his account was hacked. Maybe it was Facebook or whatever. And I said, well, his dad's a doctor. I said, doctor, where do you keep your passwords? He said, they're in my address book. So if you go into his address book on his phone or a computer, you look under F for Facebook, there's his password. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that could be a problem. Could be a problem there. But anyway, that's that. I always thought this was the year biometrics is going to somehow solve this or something. And, I'm still waiting for Godot.
I think that biometrics, you're always, it's a great solution. Like if you think, okay, well, I'm going to take a chip and I'm going to implant it in someone, and that's going to be my method for authentication, or a tattoo. Well, you know what? There's going to be a lot of people opposed to something that invasive and something that is used to identify them. So there has to be a balance of good security and usability. And it seems like right now, the password safes, the two-factor authentications is really the best options we have right now. That's not to say that in 3 to 6 months, there's going to be something better.
Yeah.
But one thing to think of is that a lot of these systems that have these multi-factor capabilities often have a fallback to a lesser or a less secured method of authentication. And that was another one of our findings was
mother's maiden name.
No, just being able to bypass two-factor authentication if it's too hard or if it fails after a certain number of time. And even the ability to enroll multiple devices. There's a lot of self-enrollment for large organizations that, okay, let's say we hire 20 people in sales. We don't want them to call into the help desk and spend an hour, because that's 20 hours that we've wasted. Let's just give them a link to a self-service portal that they can configure on their own, and then they'll have access. The problem is a lot of these companies don't shut it down after a period of time, or they don't shut it down after that person has performed the self-service. So attackers take advantage of that. And that was, so Eric Smith, one of our co-founders, he uses that all the time. Like that's his crown jewel finding, like, oh, multi-factor enrollment, I now have access to everything that this person has access to. So it's, you know, the usability and security balance has to be struck. And I really worry that we lean a bit too far towards the usability and less towards the security.
Andrew, let's hop to the second one, and then we're going to have to run through some more of these because we'll be here all day. But second one, to me, I mean, brings up the whole concept of whitelist, blacklist, right? If your default is everything on, you're going to have a hard time, right? Where if your default is everything off and turn on then as you need, I just think it's such a better approach from a security point of view, and also just from a resource wasting point of view, right? It's not just, I mean, you know, turning on stuff. I always get this. I learned this at Still Secure, Andrew. 80% of the features that we put in our apps, no one uses, right? There might be a corner case where 3% of the people use this feature, and you need it in there for those 3%. But is there a way to turn it off if they're not using it for everyone else and save the resources and you know, maybe close the security hole? Absolutely. And you know, we have moved, we've seen more whitelist, blacklist on access, but not on sort of what's turned on internally in terms of where you go. Let's run through some more of these though, because we're 20 minutes in here already. We'll never get through. Go ahead. I promise I won't interrupt. Go ahead.
So another big finding is the exploits associated with WannaCry and Eternal Blue. You know, we still find those because there are systems that are buried deep within the organization that haven't been patched, or individuals think, oh, you know, it's so far behind all of these different security controls, we don't need to patch that, it's fine. Or they're just, you know, they cannot be patched either due to software or vendor restrictions. We run into that a lot. One of the ones I want to highlight is the WMI, the Windows Management Instrumentation lateral movement. So it kind of goes hand in hand with inadequate network segmentation, which was another finding, in that I would say 99.9% of organizations do not need a Windows workstation or a Mac workstation to be able to communicate directly with the workstation in the person in the cube beside them. And
Agreed.
We're not properly segmenting them. We're not, in Windows cases, we're not disabling WMI access, which essentially gives us a pseudo API to interrogate that system, get additional information, maybe even control some of the features and functionality of that system. Not something the average person needs to be able to do to the person sitting in the cubicle beside them. But we find that all over the place, and it facilitates lateral movement to allow you to jump around from box to box within the organization. And that's a really easy fix. Logical segmentation with VLANs is a start. Firewalls on the endpoints, preventing local access, and really restricting WMI access to the network team or the teams responsible for doing any sort of administration. The last one I really want to highlight is the phishing in the middle. So it's not, everyone's heard of man in the middle, but fish in the middle happens when someone compromises a mail account or a user account, gets into the mail, and then does a reply to the individuals already in that email chain and sending them a document. So they already trust that communication channel because they've had that ongoing conversation, and they will think nothing of clicking a file or clicking a link if that person that they've been dealing with sends it to them as part of that chain. So it's a fantastic method to get someone to run a file or click a link without having to do the initial phishing and pretexting to get them to do it. You're just sending it, and they're like, oh yeah, this is what I want. This is what I've asked for. Click. Because it's very deep already within that conversation. It's a great technique, and I expect us to see more of it as time goes on. I'm sure, Alan, you've got them before, like compromised LinkedIn messages from someone you trust, like, oh, click this really ridiculous link. Well, you're immediately going to stand back and say, okay, well, I'm a little leery of this, but had you been having a conversation with that individual over the last 10, 15 minutes and you were exchanging back and forth, you might think or may not scrutinize as heavily a link that's sent as part of that conversation as you would someone just out of the blue sending you a message saying, click my link.
Sure. And that's fish in the middle.
Fish in the middle. PITM.
Yeah, sounds good, man. That's a good one for people to be aware of. Andrew, I wish we had another hour to go through all of the rest of these and I could really dig into them with you. Maybe what we'll do is we'll have you come back next week or something, and we'll pick 3 or 4 more that we could jump on.
Yeah, sure. We also recorded a webinar on Wednesday and went through all the detailed technical findings.
Where can people get that?
It's just lares.com, lares.com/webinars. And we've got it there. And so Eric Smith and Tim McGuffin are going through each of the findings, showing the mitigations and the detection capabilities.
Very cool. Andrew, thank you so much for educating us here today and coming on. It's a pleasure to see you. I hope you and Kelly are well through this craziness. And
yeah, we're doing okay.
I hear you. And God willing, next RSAC we'll have another Bald Bloggers meetup and go from there.
Yeah.
Phone kicking it. All right, Andrew. Hey, Lara's Consulting, top 10 penetration test findings or common things, and here on TechStrong TV. And sorry about that. And we'll talk later. Andrew, take care.
All right, talk to you later, Alan.
All righty. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back.
Coding is no longer just about creating new and innovative features. AppSec is a top priority, and agile organizations are looking for ways to win at security without slowing down their release cycles. This means reconfiguring our mindset and shifting security as far left as possible, the coding phase. Join us at the Secure Coding Virtual Summit by WhiteSource on April 23, 2020. Hear from industry-leading practitioners, analysts, and thought leaders from the AppSec and cybersecurity realm as they share their insights, principles, and best practices to achieve better, secure software. Visit securecoding.com for more information and to register.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DEVSECOPS, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey everyone, it's Alan, and we're back here at the TechStrong TV Center. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Andrew Hay. We just recorded that one, I think it was yesterday. Next up, though, we're going to go a little deeper into our vaults, all the way back to 2018 at the DevOps Enterprise Summit. This is an interview I did with John Willis, Damon Edwards, and Cornelia Davis. At the time, people were saying there was a little too much dev in DevOps, and we needed ops. And where were ops going to go, right? There was this SRE, I think, was a known term, but it wasn't what it is today. People weren't sure what SRE, where it was going, and what was going to become. And there was this movement for what they called no-ops, which I was never a fan of, truth be told. And I think I said it then, I'll say it now on the record. And then, people like Damon Edwards, and, Damon, bright guy, I love talking with Damon, and of course John, but really Cornelia Davis is a rock star. And the three of them got together and we talked about what we were then calling next gen ops. Now, whether this has become SRE over the last 2 years, I'll leave that for you to decide. But interesting to look back and see John and Damon and Cornelia's views on it then. So let's take a listen in. This is from DevOps Enterprise Summit in 2018. Hi everyone, it's Alan Schimmel, DevOps.com, and we're here at the DevOps Enterprise Summit UK 2018. And we have three speakers, each of which probably needs no introduction to our audience at DevOps TV, but let me do it anyway. To my far right, none other than John Willis, the one and only. John, welcome.
Thank you. Hey, good to be here.
Sitting next to John, Cornelia Davis. Cornelia, welcome to DevOps TV here. And to my immediate right, my friend Damon Edwards of Rundeck.
Hey, Alan, how you doing?
Good, Damon. Nice to have you here. So, guys, a little different than maybe some of the interviews we've done in the past. We'd like to do a deeper dive today. We're going to explore a topic. Our topic for today is next-gen ops. Some are calling it new ops. Some are calling no ops, thank God. I haven't heard the term no ops recently. But
at least the last year or so.
well, that's forever in my world, John. But anyway, Damon, I've seen you champion this. So I'm going to give you the chance to kind of define it. What do we mean by next-gen ops?
Well, I don't think it's like a thing. I think it's just saying that how do we, in this modern world, right, the go fast and the lock it down, we got that, and we have all this next generation sort of infrastructure platform technologies. So how do we operate this new stuff so we can do the new business, meet the new business demands? And I think the sort of the problem we're solving is the development side of the house has had almost 20 years of agile sort of seeping into their brains. On the ops hasn't had that. Like ops has had since 1990 ITIL seeping into their brains, which is a different kind of a different way of viewing the world. So kind of this modern operations ideas about how do we take these DevOps and agile ideas and break them down to the kind of first principles and apply them to all of this new technology, these new business demands, so we can transform operations the way that we've done a good job of transforming dev in the DevOps kind of world.
Cornelia, your world is more in the developer side of things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, as you know, I work for Pivotal. And when I started my work at Pivotal, I very much self-identified as a developer. And because that's what I'd been my entire career, 30 years or something like that. And then I got there and was working on platform as a service and realized that it was just as much of an ops story as it was a developer story. So I've had that benefit of having come from the development side and then seen some of the challenges that we have in the ops side. And so what's super interesting is to take this idea, the idea that Damon just described, but apply that to slightly different, very much related, but slightly different themes, because there are different jobs to be done by the ops people than there are the developers, and a new set of primitives, and to bring those two things together. So it's kind of from the above and coming up from the below being all the primitives that you have, the platforms that Damon mentioned, and from above being the requirements. And so it's the requirements that are changing. We're moving a lot faster, and the developers are actually bringing things to us more quickly, us being operations folks, and I have new platforms, and that's very intriguing.
It's challenging as well. John, but let me pose a...
Can I chime in?
Of course you can.
Thank you. Now, one of the things I look for like these signposts, right? And I think being part of IT Revolution and it's created an incredible network for all of us. Being part of DevOps Days has created a network. Being at Docker, so I've gotten a lot of people. Like all my best friends are all taking jobs as VP of Next Generation Platform Development in large corporations. So I see this macro trend within the last 2 years. And we've had like the past, and some of that is still in play, or but like people, large corporations are starting to like ask this question about, okay, in 2018, what do we need to look like in the next 3 years? And this is more of a technology. I totally agree with you, both of you on the meta side, but I see, like a Nick Weaver going over to Nike, and he's a platform genius, right? And different people like that are taking these new kind of roles back in large corporations. So that tells me there's this yearning in the enterprise to whatever past is prologue. And so then, like, now I'm interested in what does that look like. You know, I have my opinions, of course, but I think that's, to me, that the fabric of the future, and how are they going to evolve?
You know what I think is so interesting about that is that in the past, and still existing in enterprises today, is a lot of the plan, build, run. And you're pointing out that what we're seeing now is we're seeing a shift from plan, build, run to platform teams,
right.
Platform engineering teams. And I was noticing, like, Jason Cox has the title of systems engineer. And so we're starting to see titles like VP of platform, VP of systems engineering, and that's something that didn't exist in IT before.
Yeah. So let me play devil's advocate if I can. Mm-hmm. You know, for too long I heard from friends of mine in the IT space in general, security specifically, DevOps is just some evil scheme to let devs take control of ops, and it's a dev-centric world. But yet I've heard from devs, is DevOps, it's given all the power to ops. The ops control everything. No, you know, and maybe that's always the sign of a real compromise when both sides are a little unhappy. But did we fall out of equilibrium here where we need to have a
I'm going to talk about this in my presentation a little bit today, right? 3 years, so there was this phenomenon that happened, 4 years ago? It was called Docker, right? And it changed, and it actually gave, for the first time, developers this ability to go so far into the stack without any operation or minimal operational help, right? At least that was the promise, and it was happening. And it's why Docker went incredibly viral the first 2 years, right? Because developers, I believe, had the first time in their life felt like they had more control in the delivery of what they were doing. Life goes on, and the interesting question about, like, how do you manage that at scale comes along. Then a technology called Kubernetes comes in, and now basically it's a mess because nobody knows who owns that. So like with Docker, there was, or let's say containers, but mostly Docker, was this whole, the developers now have this freedom to drive infrastructure pretty deep into it, in some place have a lot of control of the delivery from an infrastructure standpoint. Then you get into how do you scale the architecture. Kubernetes starts getting incredibly popular. And now, really from what I see, most of the case, the developers are responsible for maintaining Kubernetes, and now they're like kind of worse off than they were. And I'm pro Kubernetes all the way. I mean, I think that is the future. I'll say that right now. But it is kind of messy right now because what looked like a clean path just got awfully ugly all over again. And developers are like, well, this is a lot harder than the Docker stuff. Yeah. You know, especially when you get into stateful stuff, right? And anyway, so, I mean, there's this weird, like, developers look like they had this clearer path. Yeah. And now we're back kind of being messy all over again.
I mean, that battle's always been fought, which is what's application, what's the platform, what's the infrastructure. So it's like I think what we're seeing is it's because the same operating model is still baked in everyone's heads. So now we have this new technology. We're still suffering from the old operating model, right? And I think that now what we're seeing with the platform, kind of the smarter companies going sort of the platform organization, right? It's no longer about operations. It's about how do you bake the kind of best practices of operations into as much of that platform as possible. So then give control to the rest of the organization through kind of pull-based self-service. But it's that ability to build, just the right amount of platform, but they have to rethink it instead of being, hey, because on operations, they've got all these different silos. We have ticket queues, and that's how the operations still, in a lot of organizations, still works. So now the challenge of the platform organization, why it's so important, is to try to bake all of that, instead of the ticket queues, into a self-service platform and really that operations as a service term we use a lot. but for the rest of the organization. And that's a new operating model. It totally fundamentally breaks how people in operations think about their job and their specialties and their silos. So I just think that it's just that has to come along. That hasn't caught up yet. That's kind of my point about, the agile side's been seeping in for a long time, and ops, it's still the ITIL, mindset that's been baked in for the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is the contracts. So it's what are the contracts that the platform is going to project up that the developers and the application teams are going to consume. And getting that contract right is really, really important. And when we did it in a smaller setting, when we were just doing application dial tone, platform as a service, we came up with some good contracts that worked well. Back to your point of Kubernetes, that has completely made fuzzy what that contract is.
Yeah.
And so I actually think of it not so much as a flattening, but what we've done is we've added an extra layer in there, and we haven't figured out what the right contract is for the application teams and for the developers.
Could be. I mean, certainly I think we're in a state of flux, and there is that push-pull, right, between these different constituencies, if you will.
But I'm just wondering about that. I think the firm is because the DevOps idea was great around the edges.
Yeah.
And it was really fine until suddenly you actually have to change. Then the pushback comes, right? It sounds so awesome. Yeah, we're going to actually, we're going to take over, we're going to run our own things. And then they actually have to do it. It's like, I didn't really want to do this. Can I give this back? Right? And then operations side, it's like, oh, that's great. We're going to do those things. And then you actually have to change how you actually work. And it's like, oh man. So I think a lot of the sort of counter reformation or kind of pushback you're getting from these different sides, because it doesn't make sense that they're each saying different things. It's just a reaction to that it's actually cutting deep. We're actually getting deeper into these organizations and affecting broader change, and that's just hard.
And I want to ask Cornelius something, so I'm going to play I actually know this, but it's for our listeners. Wink, wink. Can you go a little deep into the contracts? Because I think that's incredibly interesting. Like the transition of where we kind of felt safe and now we're kind of unsafe.
Yeah. And so, for example, the thing that I know best is Cloud Foundry, which is the product that I've been working on. And the fundamental contract between the app team and the platform team provided a contract that said, we're going to give you application dial tone. What you as the developer do, or as the DevOps, the app
kind of like the Heroku,
team,
you put
exactly.
your code
you
here.
say, here's my code.
Yeah, okay.
Run it in the cloud for me, I do not care how. And that was the contract. And then there's a few other things that you can also control, the services that you bind to the app and so on. And now enter Kubernetes, and there's this idea that the developers are going to interact with the Kubernetes, and actually in practice, they're interacting with the Kubernetes APIs. So they're generating these YAML files where they're creating their pods, and they're creating their policies, and they're creating their storage volume claims, all of these things. And what the industry hasn't really grappled with is this idea that Kubernetes is projects much more of an infrastructure dial tone.
Yeah, totally.
And that's probably not what application teams, app teams, DevOps teams really need, because that's actually going to slow them down.
Right.
And so
that was my meta point. You explain it. I love you're better, very more technical, but that's exactly my point.
And so now the question is, I'm 100% convinced that those low level primitives in Kubernetes, while I adore them, I think they're fantastic, and all the engines underneath and the control loops that do great things with those abstractions are fantastic. What we need to do as an industry is start to figure out, how do we up-level those things? How do we layer on top of those, take advantage of those low-level primitives, but present an API, present a contract to the app DevOps teams that allows them to stay efficient.
Do you think we're on the path, at least?
I think we're very, very early days. I think for the most part, we're just grappling with this idea at the moment.
To be fair to the Kubernetes lovers out there, and there are legions of them.
Me being one of them, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
What are we in, 1.0 or 1.1 of Kube at this
No,
point?
like 1.7, 1.8.
1.7.
I don't know.
It's still.
Yeah, but it's
I mean, I remember when it was the first 1.0 came out, right? It wasn't. So.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about something that so fundamentally changes the way we do things, is it realistic to expect that it would be mature while it was still immature? No, I think
But I think
You know,
Kenny makes a
compare it
great
to other-
point. Like again, I was just saying vaguely that the developers are now confused, but you're right. We had that Heroku-like contract. The purity of a pass was this Heroku-like contract where literally you put
Don't
your
worry
code
about
here, you hit a button, and like it happens. And if you wanted some type of service with Cloud Foundry, I mean, I was a big fan of Cloud Foundry early on. I do think it has to evolve in the Kubernetes world, and I know you agree. But you're right, like that we've lost all of that, of this idea that the developer really just wants to put, that's why, I'll shut up in a second, why they love Docker so much, because from the how do you scale, how do you orchestrate, it was, I create an immutable object, I push it, and I'm...
Yeah, so I put it this way, like Kubernetes might be 1.7, figuring out how to actually work with this stuff is like 0.1.
That's the point I was getting
that's
at.
the whole problem.
And let me throw another
We're changing how
concept.
you work, and that's totally different, and that's part's got to be figured out, because otherwise you can't escape this sort of infrastructure dial tone. I like that word. You can't escape those primitives, because and then anything you bake in is just going to be, if everyone's doing 10 different things, you're going to satisfy one person and nine people that you're going to upset. So everything stays at that low level until people do the hard work and the fault starts to figure it out, and then you can kind of jump up a level and say, okay, now we've kind of got a common idea on that.
But nature abhors a vacuum, right? And so is that the vacuum that creates, let me bring it full circle first, is that the vacuum that creates this new ops or modern ops or whatever you want to call it? Is that ops' new mission? Is it just a maturation of Kubernetes? I mean,
I think that the modern ops in the context, at least we're kind of talking about at this conference, is we've got to figure that out. We have to figure out what to do so we can sort of start to build those primitives and standardize things. So this stuff that's now application, stuff that's now like sort of the things that we do individually in a company, can kind of melt into the background. And you kind of saw that sort of at sort of the cloud primitives, like, with the rise of especially of AWS, like people just kind of, all right, this is sort of how things are supposed to work, this is how we work with it. We kind of have a sense for how that feels. Now it's no longer really contentious. And that's got to happen with the container, the kind of cloud native world.
You made a good point the other night. Like there's two sides to this, right? There's the kind of operations meta, and then the operations technology. Damon, hello.
Yeah, sorry. Distracted by that.
Sorry, we had a distraction.
I mean, I think you described it really well. That we have to have two brains here. We have to have the operations meta of how we think about operationalization in the new world, not ITIL. But then there's the technology at the same time.
Yeah, it's both.
It's two pieces that have to be matured.
Yeah, it's like a complex or a complicated system. A complex system of technologies, and users and everything, and platforms interacting with a complex system called human beings. At the same time, but to solve both problems. I think people love to fall into one or the other and kind of forget that you've got to do both. Just giving everybody Kubernetes is not going to solve our problems, because you're encasing it in this concrete of
from a
these
developer.
These old ways.
I love it.
But there's people out there think that.
No,
Get my hands on these new tools, all this stuff's going to go away, and then you see the chaos in the blowback when people do that.
And that's the curse of being an evangelist, where you want, like for me being an evangelist, I want to push new edge technology, be very excited about it, and then you got to pull back a little to make sure people understand the complexities. And so it's a little push-pull of like, I'm very high on a lot of the things that go on Kubernetes, but then you're right, you have to kind of pull it back.
But that's classic crossing the chasm kind of stuff, right? You want to be a 15% early adopter, well, that's the price you pay.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's the fun work, quite frankly.
Yeah. For some. For others, and in some organizations, depending how risk-averse they are.
No question.
Right? I was interviewing the folks from Capital One earlier, and the business person said, their job is measuring risk and risk management. And so when they look at new technologies, the risk is it mature enough? Is it going to create too much change or what have you, right? Now, some organizations like Cap One will go out there, right? They're way out there. Others are not as right? They're more risk or less risk adverse.
Yep. And that kind of goes back to the Kubernetes has been out in open source for 3 years, quite frankly. It's been out there for a long time. But back to Damon's point, it's 0.01 in the enterprise.
Yeah.
And we do see some folks, we even saw Adidas this morning, who said, we're running Kubernetes clusters. But that is still pretty nascent in most organizations, and even within the organization, relatively small. And so, yeah, it's very early days still.
Yes, it is. But, I think back to VMware adoption, right? And how I thought that happened overnight. It was 5 years, maybe 6 years, right, till we saw really, I think Kubernetes, it might be half of that in terms of
I'm not
adoption.
sure, because the thing about VMware and that adoption is that we weren't actually asking people to change things too radically. We weren't asking them to change their application structures. We were giving them the same exact primitives that they were using before in a hardware setting.
Just an hypervisor.
As
relative.
virtualized. And now we're actually shifting the dial tone.
Change everything.
I mean, how many companies had they just had to hit their objective to move to VMs.
Well, it was
and they
consolidation,
had one
right?
but a lot of them just had one long running VM on top of one physical
Exactly.
machine. Or okay, maybe we're gonna consolidate. So it means 5 long running VMs on one physical machine. So you're not really fundamentally changing how developers create,
changing the app layer.
and you're not really changing how you operate. You're just adding another kind of layer of complexity in there, or complication. I guess.
But this has been a long and winding road. Cloud has, initial cloud was kind of lift and shift, and then we learned that was terrible. And so the whole cloud native, 12-factor. One of the greatest things I love about Pivotal, I had this kind of epiphany the other day, and it was at a customer, and we were debating whether Kubernetes in pass and where it should be. And one of the things they out and out said, the greatest thing that that Cloud Foundry did for us is it forced us to do 12-factor act, because you couldn't. So I realized, I'm not paying as much tribute to a technology that has you went to it, and to go to it you had to be 12-factor app, right? And that's kind of brilliant, right? You leave some people behind, but my longer point is this whole cloud native 12-factor, microservice, whatever you want to call it today. We've been winding down this path. When people started going to Amazon, they realized you really had to refactor stuff. You had to decouple. Went to containers. Of course, that was a beautiful collision of microservices and compute infrastructure. And what you guys have done with the 12-factor act and pushing that. So I think Kubernetes is going to move a little faster, because a lot of the greenfield world in most enterprises is kind of hip to this this model, and so I think there's still going to be a lot of legacy stuff, but I do think it's still ugly, it's still the Wild West,
here's a thought. So think about that, since we're here in jolly old England, and talk a lot about history. That in every era of, some say the other day, every era of history thinks that they're the penultimate.
The serverless
history,
kids,
they've solved all the problems, right? So this is a question of we thought VMs were this is the future. It's gonna solve all the problems,
right? And
then it was this kind of cloud thing, and then it was remember OpenStack? Anybody? Right? That was gonna solve all of our problems, and then it's Docker is that's it. It's done. That's gonna solve our problems, right? And then it's no, we need Kubernetes, right? And now there's a serverless thing kind of lurking out there too. So we got to think about that. It might take 3 years for Kubernetes to kind of to mature to more of a mainstream operation. But then, are we going to look back and go, this was the OpenStack of the mid 2010s, and there's something 5 years from now, we're remember Kubernetes? It's just one of those things where we foolishly thinking that this is it.
I'll hold
when
the
there's
full
a
flag
bunch
for
of
minute.
other things coming.
I think, and there's some people believe this, and I'm leaning in this camp, that Kubernetes could be the next Linux kernel. And I think Google has this idea that they could drive it down to be completely commodified, and that it becomes the base way you run any application. I think it's naive to say that, given what the world looked like 4 years ago.
Right.
But I do have this fundamental belief that's a possibility, that Kubernetes could be that layering, that it could be like a 10-year thing.
Right. Or is there something else we need?
There
right?
certainly could be
Or
something.
think about how easy Linux was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? We probably had similar conversations then.
But Linux is a 20-year run, right?
There's
a chance I think Kubernetes could be a 10 or 20-year run if
Could
it
very
becomes
well be.
fabric-based.
Yep.
Someone much smarter than me taught me that most of our changes are evolutionary, not revolutionary. And I think with Kubernetes, you're going to see a continued evolution. Don't look for the revolution.
I like that, yeah.
Unless it's the IT revolution.
There
on
you
the wall. The writing's on the wall.
That's a good
Hey, that's a good place to end this one.
Yeah, I was wondering, that was a good...
All right. Hey, this was a fascinating conversation. I hope you folks enjoyed it. Again, Cornelia Davis, John Willis, Damon Edwards here at, where are we? We're at DevOps Enterprise Summit,
And Alan,
UK.
just point out, I mean, like Cornelia's presentation, when is your presentation?
Tomorrow morning.
Like we have queued this up. Like the expectations are very high that this is going to be. And Damon's saying his presentation might be one of the best ones he's ever given. So just,
here's the good
by
news
the way,
at home.
folks,
We'll see.
You can catch all of these presentations over on the IT Rev YouTube channel or through DevOps TV, and you can catch them there. And I'm sure they'll all be great. You guys, all three of you, do great work.
Thank you.
All right, this is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com, DevOps TV. Have a great day, everyone.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Hey everyone, back here in the studio. Hope you enjoyed that video. As I mentioned earlier, it's 2 years old, but it's interesting to see how the whole new ops and SRE movement has matured, and you almost never hear about no ops anymore. But anyway, let's move on to today's show. Our next segment is featuring, of course, our friend John Willis, co-founder with me of Digital Anarchist, and John does segments every Tuesday here on TechStrong TV. John has actually two pieces that I wanted to go over with you for today. One is a relatively short interview he did with, Mark Kinkle of Trigger Mesh, and it kind of speaks for itself. And then John does a really long piece, kind of talking more about the business continuity, BCC as he calls it, business continuity in the through the lens of COVID. And I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's, without further ado, let's bring John on. John, take it away.
All right, here I'm with Mark Hinkle, a good friend of mine for many years. We go way back, probably even pre-DevOps, early cloud conversations. But Mark is a good friend. He's got a new startup that he's been working on for I don't know how long. But Mark, tell me about Trigger Mesh. What's going on here?
Yeah, we founded Trigger Mesh in September of 2018 as a result of actually GitLab came to us asking us if we could build their serverless infrastructure and publishing mechanism for the GitLab product platform. And so we incorporated, and we've been working on it since then. Last fall, we launched our announced our EveryBridge product, which is a cross-cloud event bus that allows you to trigger serverless infrastructure across multiple, and serverless infrastructure is almost an oxymoron, but serverless functions across multiple cloud providers and Kubernetes, Knative, using our message bus to trigger those functions, have them execute based on cloud events.
Yeah, so it's a really cool idea, right? Because we've got all this sort of serverless, which actually started with Amazon's Lambda, and then different cloud providers came out with their sort of functions, and then the Google, Kubernetes project announced Knative, which is really sort of a serverless implementation inside of Kubernetes. And I know you guys were pretty heavily involved in some of that early Knative stuff, and then saw this opportunity that people are going to want to sort of bridge between these functions that lie all over the place. So, that's pretty cool. And then you guys got some cool use cases too, right?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we think are interesting. Early on, it would be things like you have an application that is consuming its storage from Amazon S3, and that application may run on OpenShift or IBM Cloud or Google or somewhere other than the Amazon ecosystem. And when you upload an image to Amazon S3, it creates an event via CloudWatch, and we could take that CloudWatch event and actually alert the application on OpenShift. Actually, one of the things that we were working on this morning that I think is interesting too is for chat ops, say you have an application that doesn't have a Slack integration, and maybe that application isn't widely used like GitHub and some of the other applications that are integrated with Slack. You could use Trigger Mesh's hosting and ability to integrate with virtually any application via enterprise service buses to take messages that are coming from that service bus and populate them into Slack. And then you could also, vice versa, use Slack to automate some things through the chat interface.
Oh yeah, chat ops there's probably a gold mine there for like what you guys are doing here.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the olden times, and we both have more gray hair than a lot of folks, but if you were a system administrator, you had a bunch of shell scripts that you took everywhere that did all sorts of things, and they were probably written with sednock and those kind of scripts that we use to administrator servers. Now you could actually take those kind of operational tasks, put them in a serverless function, and then integrate them from Slack, for example. So say even something simple like log rotate on a server, you could actually prompt log rotate from Slack and use a serverless function to do that, or archive, or other tasks that you had in your bag of bash or corn or whatever shell scripts that you were using at the time. Now could be serverless functions that actually automate it. And because they're hosted in the cloud and not on that, back in the day, it would have been an iOmega zip drive full of operational tools. Now you can have them stored in by a serverless provider. And if you leave, that knowledge is codified and institutionalized within your cloud account, and other people could use them. So I think that's a use case for the developers and the operations people that is sort of interesting. I've been actually kicking around what kind of things I would do.
Yeah, it's funny how technologies find their own sort of use patterns, right? Like, they're sort of, virtualization is going to get rid of bare metal. Containers are going to get rid of virtualization. Serverless is going to get rid of containers, right? Whatever, right? But like they all find their own sort of unique patterns, and I think that's what's interesting about sort of serverless in general or functions code is I think this pattern of event gateway like changes everything, right? Like your example, even sysadmin tools. You think about as people sort of get more familiar with this. I've heard stories of people building out new sort of quick hybrid applications using sort of serverless functionality. And I think that the idea to have sort of an event gateway or event bridge across anywhere to anywhere, I think you guys are sitting in a really good position. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I feel that way.
Yeah, no, good luck. I'd like to see my friends succeed. So it'll be awesome to watch this thing grow. So, all right, Mark, well, thanks so much. For sharing some of this.
Thank you.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue, or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. To Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
Good morning. It's Tuesday morning. It's John Willis again. It's my Tuesday morning TechStrong show. So you can see I've updated my library. Actually, a trivia question, maybe a free T-shirt or something from Digital Anarchist, if you can guess whose library that really is. So anyway, tweet me, or I guess tweet me. So I'm Botchgaloop. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. TechStrong, and covers a couple of things. What I'm going to do this morning. Let's get myself in present mode, and let's see if I'll move my mug down here. So maybe a little bit of more me, but less me, more me, whatever. Anyway, Tuesday, April 14th. I'm John Willis. This is Botchgaloop, and so I was thinking today. I've got a little lazy. I was supposed to interview a few people during the week last week, and I didn't get around to it. So it's Monday, and I'm recording this now. So I figured I'd do a little fun things I've been noodling. First off, I'm gonna do a little. Each week, I think I'm gonna add a little sort of 10-minute. Just introduce some of my friends who have startups, people I really like, interesting startups. So we'll talk about Trigger Mesh. I'll talk about automated governance. And we'll kind of go through what's going on there. Black Swan. Talk about sort of Black Swan. I'm going to also cover a little bit more on sort of DevOps and BCM, like what I did last week. I had that presentation I did last Tuesday morning on the TechStrong. So for those who get to watch it, I'll have a link to it. But I've been doing a little more work on that. And then if we have time, so a couple other things I've been doing, like history of infrastructure code is funny. And I'm not sure if we'll have time for the three economies, but we'll definitely cover that next week. And like I said, I really want to get interview Jay Bloom, because he's the author of this, like, I think, really compelling idea. So automated governance, really the first topic. So back in last year, I think April, Gene Kim invites about 40 of us to Portland for a couple of days. Some people refer to it as Gene's pajama party. We all come up there, and we break up in 5 or 6 groups, and then we start studying these ideas, and usually they come out as sort of ebooks on IT Revolution. So last year, I really wanted to sort of collaborate with certain people on this idea of DevOps automated governance. So we had a reference architecture, the Nike, PNC, Marriott, Microsoft, let's see who else. Oh, Capital One, and then Sabre was also all in this group. And the idea was we really had kind of 3 things we wanted to create a reference architecture. So we had really 2 days to do it. We spent a couple of about 2 months in sort of weekly meetings trying to finish the document and the reference architecture. But 3 things primarily. One was increase the efficacy of an audit. You know, I do this presentation called The 7 Deadly Sins of DevOps. And the 7th deadly sin is what I call security and compliance theater, which means that most of the audits in large corporations really do not reflect modernization technology, DevOps, all these things. And I've gone through this in many of my presentations. So maybe increase the efficacy, have real, maybe instead of like really low 20%, high 90s. The second, which is probably maybe the biggest of the 3, which is change audits into, like, instead of being 30-day audits, maybe a half-day audit. So use sort of signature or some form of blockchain, not necessarily have to be blockchain, but certainly sort of SHA and token-based hashes that you can sort of rely on their immutability, what we call attestations. I won't go into too much. I've got longer presentations on this. And then third was sort of start the beginning of the answering question, how do we get rid of Chain Advisory Board? So if you have sort of immutable, what I call objective attestations as opposed to subjective attestations. So subjective is your sort of change records that say, excuse me, they say that, you know, Joe says to Sue, Sue says this, and the change record is sort of a human telephone game as opposed to these being hashes of evidence automated during the pipeline and the software delivery. And we use this reference architecture of these 7 stages in each one. I think when I counted, we actually had like 75 attestations that we came up with in this reference article. It's brilliant. It's all Creative Commons. Go to IT Revolution, Forum Papers. You'll see them in the 2019 papers. And then some of the follow-on stuff on this has been Policy as Code. Some of the banks that took this a step further have really gotten into sort of YAML with the policy people. So now once you have that sort of automated governance in the pipeline in these sort of hash-based attestations, now you could go to sort of create human readable files from policy people to sort of driving. It's amazing stuff. So that got me into another working group called the Open Networking User Group, and they've been doing they were early in on SD-WAN, software-defined networking, and they've been getting into sort of DevOps and DevSecOps as of late. And Nick Lippis, who runs this group, pinged me about the paper, the DevOps Automated Governance, and he sent it out to a few of his companies that he works with on a lot of these SD-WAN or security and the projects, and they got all excited about this. And so we started back in I think in January maybe. We started working on this cloud automate. Well, actually, it was going to be a follow-on to that, but everybody wanted to focus on cloud, and that was fine with me. So FedEx, Cigna, PNC, United Technology. I think now we have. We also have J.P. Morgan Chase involved and B of A and Kaiser Permanente. So really good stuff. And this is, instead of working on sort of the software pipeline, although related, we would talk with, and this is a paper that's going to be due out in May. And there's a conference I'm going to tell. We're going to actually, and it's going to be Creative Commons, just like the other system. But the idea is really, here again, sort of 3 ideas. One is, could we sort of do this industry ask of having anybody who has a cloud infrastructure create a signature, like a signed sort of event that's a signature of their boot sequence. So if the boot sequence changes, then the people who have to deal with sort of governance and cloud and security and cyber know that there's a possibility to change. So from electricity to like hypervisor, if and this way during your delivery, in the automated governance, DevOps automated governance, one of the attestations could be to check to see if the anything in sort of the boot sequence has changed. So you should imagine, this might sound inconsequential, but at scale. So imagine there's a change to somewhere in the boot sequence of Amazon, and whoever changes it doesn't believe that it has to be sort of presented to all the clients, all the tenants that are using it. But then it does create some unintended consequences for security professionals who have to deal with the scale, right? So the idea that you could check the immutability, and not that the cloud providers are going to give up their secret sauce, but if they could just sort of provide a common format across all the clouds and platform providers to say, this is the type of event signature that we need to know, sort of a checksum of your boot sequence. The second, which is even cooler, which is ask for a common event structure, a push or pull of every ingress request from a tenant to a cloud provider. So, and sort of not in a sort of packet and not in a sort of log format, but somewhere in between where, and it's sort of normalized between the cloud providers. So if you're getting block storage or use a certain type of service, it's a normalized event. And so this is the idea, is that now you could put sort of an event gateway and see all your one tenant's requests to a particular provider. And now you could do denial of service. You can look for storms, improper usage patterns. And somebody say, well, you can do this by getting logs, but then you get, just to get all the logs on one provider. And then I've talked to so many companies that have done sort of something like this. And when I tell them this idea, like, oh my God, just one shot, and not just for one provider, a normalized. And remember, like, the expectation is that we're not going to the cloud providers and saying you must have this. But if you look at the first round of companies, they're writing this paper. Second round of companies, probably 20 more global 500s. We're talking trillions of dollars in buying power. Maybe if we all get together and ask. And then third is to each provider has its own cloud security framework, and security professionals have to deal with the nuances of each. So that's a general. There'll be more and more on this. I'm just trying to cover it quickly. And there's some principles of how we're going to sort of drive governance and policy, human readable, outcome driven expressions, platform agnostic. I talked about that. Durable and stable taxonomy by design, strongly typed implementation. So we can actually put axiomatic proof on these things. So, which is a good part of, we have a whole section on axiomatic proofs and axiomatic policy. And then, obviously parameterized, it would help sort of normalization across multiple providers, enterprise accessible, authorized, testable, and links, right, to have that both put together. And so what I told you that paper, the cloud automated governance, is something that we're planning on doing. Now it's going to be a physical conference, obviously, like all conferences now. It's virtual, and it's on May 6th and 7th. It's free, and again, all the papers. There's other projects that are going to be presenting here, but our paper and most of the projects, certainly ours, are going to be Creative Commons. So I did want to just show you the agenda. It's pretty like rock solid. We're still fleshing out. One of my tenets always is to make sure there's diverse panels. So I'm making sure that at least any panel I'm on has diversity on it. But we're trying our best to get this right. You'll see a lot of diversity in here. But some of the things I wanted to show you. This is one that's going to be good. I was going to be the moderator for this, but it's again in my sort of I've made an industry promise that I will not be on all male panels, and I'm sticking to it, even ones where I was going to be the moderator for a CISO fireside chat. But Don Duet, and it's just so hard to get sort of CISOs, in general. But Don Duet, who's working on the project with us on the cloud automated governance, is going to moderate with FedEx, Cigna, and United Technologies. So that should be a lot of fun. This one also, we're sort of shuffling the diversity on here, so we're going to have a little bit of a change up. But the key points is this is cloud automated governance, and then I'm really excited to have John Rezatowski on here. The stuff he's been doing, he actually was co-author of that DevOps automated governance, and the stuff that he's been doing with policy as code, and it's just incredible. So it's going to be really fun to hear him talk about this. And then you've got another building your digital transformation leadership. If you don't know Shannon Leeds, she's been my mentor for security. Abby Kearns, brilliant woman. This is going to be, the talent here, and this is free. It's a free virtual. And then here you got another one on DevSecOps, large enterprise with Shannon. Now Pat O'Neill's been working on the cloud governance project with me and a couple other people. He's really, I've just met him for the first time in January, and I'm like, we're best friends. I love the way he thinks. Just going through the agenda, a couple more on Thursday. A couple of these things are going to change a little bit. Now this is one as a panel. I'm trying to get Shannon on this. We may get somebody else I know really well, but automated governance to reduce compliance audits. So this is back to that sort of that original paper I told you, Pat O'Neill, and then Caleb Curran. He's been working on the DevOps Enterprise Summit on the Ask Auditors Anything, if you've been in DevOps Enterprise. So we're going to do a nice fireside chat here on talking about how maybe some of these PAC files and objective attestations that I talked about in that earlier paper could work. Carlos Matos, this guy's been at B of A for years. Again, I can go on and on. I'm actually doing, I got pulled into a cloud native, pragmatic large enterprise SRE. So a lot of one of my sort of passions right now is what SRE really looks like. Anyway, just wanted to sort of give you that. So that's going to be a lot of fun. The Digital Live, and so find it, ONUG, pretty easy to find, and or ping me if you need to find it. And then the other thing that came up recently, which is kind of funny, is this the notion of a black swan. I'll go through this quick. I have this thing with Taleb, the Black Swan author, anti-fragile author. He called me an idiot on Twitter one time. I was trying to have a reasonable discussion with him. Apparently, he's sort of I guess no other way to say he's a jerk. But I thought it was really cool. Hey, Nassim Taleb called me an idiot, but I was like, yeah, he's done that to a lot of people, so don't feel that special. But anyway, so so I wrote that. I was thinking about. So what happened was that Taleb was recently on, and he was talking about how the COVID-19 is not a black swan. I think, well, okay, I don't know, right? Like so. What is a black swan? I think in Tyler's book, it's a 10 sigma, which is like impossible to happen, right? Like the whole notion of a black swan, nobody had ever seen a black swan. It was, the sort of metaphor of a black swan was the impossible, and then all of a sudden they found black swans, right, in Australia. But but a while back, about 5 years ago, I wrote this sort of tongue-in-cheek article about what's your sigma, explaining what sigma is, and really about sort of just talking about operations research and just sort of learning and having fun. But the interesting thing was I just sort of played around with numbers about, like, if you own I don't remember the exact numbers, but if you were able to get rich enough from rags to riches to own like the Philadelphia Eagles, then you probably were somewhere between a 3 and 4 sigma, right? Probably 4 sigma easily. And then I used a lot of sort of the death rates, like in a heart attack, and what was the sigma of your probability of dying of a certain type of thing. And I realized that sort of played into where we are right now. And so I went back this time to CDC, and I looked at like how many people die a year from heart disease or stroke or diabetes or influenza, and then the sort of the low projections originally. I know as of today, thank God, the projections seem like they might be way lower than people had feared, including myself. But even at 100,000, right, the COVID-19 is going to, 100,000, and that's not a year. That's basically a couple of months, right? So I started questioning, and so I went back and Taleb had said that the 2008 financial crisis was a black swan. He also said 9/11 was a black swan. And then the reason, and then I saw him say on like CNN that he said the COVID-19 or coronavirus was not a black swan. And like, again, I don't really like the guy, so it sort of got me prompted to do like, okay, then. But my point of this article was more about if you were going to say, if you could make an argument that the 2008 housing crisis was a black swan, and his argument was that the reason 9/11 and 2008 housing crisis or recession, if you will, was a black swan because nobody knew it was coming. Well, Michael Lewis's Big Short is a great example of a few people actually did know it was coming. The 9/11, there's been many stories about the Clinton administration leaving information and being ignored by the incoming Bush administration, of ignoring the threats of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, right? And so now you fast forward to, and I'm trying not to be political, I'm just using the sort of anti-argument of Taleb, is that if you look at, you could argue that we could have known a lot more about handling this virus back in, and we did know, right? Even early as today, New York Times reporting all the times that the administration was warned how severe this was and how they had gotten rid of a White House research team on the pandemics, right? So anyway, the point is, I draw this thing that I think, it's up to the reader to decide. So at the end, I'd still ask the question, is this a black swan? But I do sort of, in perspective of what's going on. At one point I said that I never thought in my life would I see, Times Square, Hollywood Boulevard and Vegas Strip all empty during the middle of the day at the same time, right? If you go by the Big Short, right, there was a fair amount, a small group of people that shorted the industry and made a ton of money. And if that's a black swan, if I could go back on time and invest in December or even January, heck, Delta was at 60. It's now trading around 23. I mean, some of the, anybody who shorted this market, then they're going to make a lot more than anybody made on the Big Short story. And therefore, if that's a big black swan, I would question whether this should be considered a black swan. I don't know. Just sometimes I do wacky stuff because I'm bored. And then I did want to sort of cover the BCM and DevOps. So last Tuesday I did a presentation on BCM and DevOps, and it was an hour-long presentation. And at that time, it was really sort of a novel hobby to me to explore this. Since then, I've taken a little more serious. People got a little more interested. I've interviewed a number of airlines and transportation and entertainment and healthcare companies. And so at this point, I've got sort of a lot more data on this subject. And I think it's, turning out to be a lot more compelling in terms of the story. So I wanted to just update. I'm probably going to write a blog article here, in the next couple of days. But I do want to go ahead and just give you a quick update. I'm just getting to my notes here a little bit, so catching up. So there's this this. Some people say this is pretty cruel, but I don't know. Anyway, here's the presentation I did last week, right? And here's the Vimeo. I just skipped past Alan's intro, so it's T = 7 minutes. But this is what I covered. But here's the sort of joke that's going around, right? It's a joke, or who led the digital transformation of your company? The CEO, the CTO of COVID-19. And I mentioned that somebody at an airline, and they were like, "That's cold." So you gotta be a little careful on who you sort of expose this satire to. Some companies are taking it a little harder than others. But the thing is, there's the other thing too. I realized as I was talking to companies, I tell you, I talked to airlines, I've talked to a number of groups. That you could actually categorize them in kind of simplistic categories. Now there's overlap and all, but there's companies that right now are scaling. Like I talked about banks and what banks are having to do with the CARE Act and sort of SBA loaning and all this stuff, right? So there are definitely companies, whether they like it or not, they're in like fantastic. Zoom, though they're sort of a startup, but the enterprises, the banks, the financial institutions, the insurance companies, and in some ways, even the airlines are having to scale in ways they never thought they were going to, like refunds, for example. And then there's organizations retracting, and so so we're seeing. So the point is, the companies that having to refund and weren't scaled to do refunding, so they're in this like, batten down the hatches. We need to just focus on this, shut everything else down. And then there's sort of interesting people who are just maintaining, things like their like entertainment, the sort of, or amusement parks, they're down. They're losing money because they're not generating revenue, but they're not like sort of, there's nothing going on. They're not having to put anything in. In fact, there's some interesting conversations of what to do with all that sort of compute power and infrastructure. So like I said, I've talked to industries in airline, entertainment, and financial, retail, and healthcare. So it just updates, the airlines in general, depending on who you talk to, losing anywhere from $50 to $60 million a day. Some of the airlines are doing good on refunds, some are not. But no matter what, the help or the reservation agents are just overstocked, and then they're having to deal with social distancing. So it's a really complex problem, right? And some of the airlines are refunding $30 million a day, losing $60 million. It's crazy. And I was telling somebody recently, they were, I was saying there's positive and negatives to every story. And they're like, what could be positive with the airline? I'm like, actually, some of the airlines who've invested a lot of money in their safety, maintenance, engineering, sort of their brand is safety. For example, Delta, to me, I'm in Atlanta, so I have to fly Delta, but I do know, for my own peace of mind, I think Delta is one of the safest airlines to fly. Just sort of knowing about how serious they take everything, but they're also really good at catering. And so imagine they come at it as not only the safest airline, but the healthiest airline. So I think there's some interesting and plus the other thing is airlines are sort of used to sort of cost averse because they've been through strikes, pilot strikes, they've been through 9/11, right? 9/11 was a complete shutdown. And entertainment, I talked about, so imagine like all your parks, all your stores, if you have cruise lines, all your cruise lines are down. If you have own sports, all your sports are down, right? So that's sort of interesting stuff. What's interesting there is talking to some people who work in these companies is they still have all this compute and infrastructure. Now, if you've moved to cloud, great, but very few enterprises move all to cloud. In fact, most core businesses for most companies are still running on-prem. So now you're sitting here, and the thing is, if you've got 1,000 computers or whatever, and whether they run 1% or 99%, you're still going to pay all the bills. So what was interesting is maybe something that came out of this was if you had sort of arbitrage agreements, so that if, you know, so the whole idea is BCM broken? Well, BCM would have been not broken had you thought about a scenario where you might be for 3-4 months not using any of your capacity, and had arrangements with supply chain or business partners or people who could use your capacity, right? And have an arbitrage agreement for a scenario like this. Nobody has this that I've known of. You know, we talked about financials and the banks and what they're going through and the speed. The other thing that was funny, a cable company I talked to, where this the speed test, right, which was just sort of an afterthought. It's always been there. It has to be maintained. But now the CEO whacks enter on it on every 15 minutes. It's not the most important application. They want to know what, you know, what's going on for, you know, for all the sort of what's going on for all the clients, you know, how quick are they using the network? How fast are they absorbing all the VPN growth? Retail, same thing. And then there's a couple of retail companies I've talked to who have been sort of practicing. There's this theme of people who have been practicing certain things, you know, and I'll just go back to Damon Edwards and my original CAMS and, you know, cultural automation, measurement, sharing, like the sort of the behavior patterns, the investments are paying off, right? The freedom to fail, your sort of culture, your psychological safety, your collaboration. So now people, anti-command and control structures. So people out in the field, they have to make sharp, fast decisions. They can't follow the classic chain of command. They can't get everybody into a meeting room. You know, they can do virtual, but they can't all sort of swarm into a whiteboard with a room. So you really need the people to feel like they can make decisions and that they have the freedom. And so the companies that have sort of instilled that sort of culture are really showing up blazing right now. Same thing with sort of automation technology. You know, the companies that have moved in all in. Again, I've said this in the last week's presentation. It's not that containers are the end all be all, but they sure make hybridity, and hybridity is a really awesome thing to have in a meta crisis like COVID-19. You know, like to be able to, you know, here example. There's some groups that said that, you know, they've got like 15, 20, maybe 30% of there's certain divisions onto Kubernetes and containers. Well, once everybody had to run from home and they couldn't work with sort of internal infrastructure, they were all begging and clamoring. They were kicking and screaming against it. Now they're begging, like, how can I get this stuff into containers? Because they see that stuff moves to the cloud really fast. Right, so all your sort of CI/CD stuff, you know, we talked about the banks last week being able to deliver software in 3 days. Well, if you haven't automated all your pipelines, no chance. Telemetry, observability for measurement, right? Again, you don't want to have outages, and then just the sort of, I call it a cybernetic feedback loop, where it just sort of loops back into culture, which is sharing, right? Like collaboration, like, and even better now, having companies. I was just on Gene Kim has been running these happy hours, which is awesome, right? So Gene does so many great things for our industry that people don't realize. So we run these happy hours, and let's say with 20 companies, 20 biggest companies you know of, and we're all sharing ideas and things, you know, and the freedom to share. So like banks are telling other banks what they're doing, airlines are telling other airlines what they're doing, retailers are telling other retailers. Like, so having that sort of culture where you're not afraid that your management's like, you know, do not share any of this internal, don't share it external. Right, like these are the people. And then, you know, one of the things that Jay Bloom, so you're going to hear me talk about Jay Bloom a lot. I've learned so much from him, along with Kevin Bear and Andrew Schaefer, but what he calls adaptive skills liquidity, right? It's a mouthful. But so this is an idea that you sort of have balanced skills. We sort of know this. I don't really like the full stack engineer idea, but it's more along the lines of, have you built sort of capacity-based teams? You know, there's this capacity-based budgeting where you sort of, you don't get, you know, you get budgeting based on the capacity you have, or you get allocated projects. Like, here's our team, here's the boundaries, here's what we can accomplish, here's what we can do, as opposed to sort of this funding and you've got this much money. Well, when you have that, you basically have to have adaptive skills liquidity, because they need to be able to sort of do anything that's thrown at them. But then once you have that in these sort of meta crisis we're in right now, these teams can be very adaptive on what they do. They can be lent out to other areas. Maybe they're part of supply chain, but now they can go to infrastructure and help out. So this notion of skills liquidity, what is the liquidity the skill set and focusing. And then companies that have focused on that have focused on, capacity-based projects, what we call capacity variable. They can do quick pivots. They can adjust. They can, and then adaptive capacity, right? Those are all the things. That's your ability to adapt to technology, process, people, all together, right? This all sort of works really, really cool. I heard a great story of a company that has a print center. So it's basically they process requests or payment systems. And there's certain jurisdictions or certain legal requirements or contract requirements where you have to have certain clients they have to have physically printed paper. So one of the things that's coming out of this not only is of people I've heard the phrase that, this crisis is not a crisis because we've invested in all these sort of DevOps-y things or modernization things a few years ago. But they're also sort of now sitting back and say, "Ooh, what could we have learned to do way better coming at us?" And so this is the coolest thing I've heard out of everything. The thing I told you earlier about arbitrage for unused capacity was cool, but this is even cooler. So in this particular scenario, they had 3 print centers set out sort of equally across the U.S. So the chances of all 3 of them getting knocked out by some force majeure, like a hurricane, or like 1,000,000 to 1, right? Like 3 hurricanes in one in California, one in Chicago, and one in Florida, right? At the same time, right? Or earthquakes, right? Very unlikely to happen. But in this scenario where you have shelter in place, you have basically social distancing, all these things where everybody's got to work from home, right? Now you actually have this sort of black swan, and so. One of the things that came up, one of my conversations I thought was brilliant, is if you had a force majeure, so you could classify this force majeure, you could go to those sort of clients that require physical printing and say, well, force majeure, like we can't, but I'll tell you what, we could put a Lambda, we've been experimenting with this Lambda-based system that acts as an e-print that's a meta site that sets up quickly on your site so you can print locally. And if their answer is no, we can't do that because we have the legal requirements and governance, you say, well, then you got 2 choices. You take the force majeure, which is you're not getting it at all, or you take this. So basically, it's sort of how to sort of make force majeure an economic advantage. I just think that's really, really cool. And then, I don't want to over-rotate on Zoom. I know everybody is like, sort of crazy on Zoom right now, but I do think there's some interesting things to learn about. I think the story I think is going to be fascinating when all this said is done is, how Zoom learned 5 years of scaling learning in 5 weeks or 2 months. This is some of the things I clipped. There's a great article about Zoom's network engineer and what they've had to go through and how they planned, and so I think there's going to be I think the what we'll find out of Zoom's story after this is over, and that's the other thing. I think all these companies is I promised everybody I interviewed to give anonymity, but like when they start talking about the things that like their CEO is going to start saying, we're doing this, what this division was doing, DevOps. This is the way the whole company is going to run from here. So we're going to see a lot of sort of post-mortem, like how we're going to behave in the future is what we learned. Back to like who created, that sort of satire based, who created your last transformation, right? In March, Zoom reported more than 200 million meetings every single day, right? And then there's an article that then you get like, I don't say strange bedfellows, but this guy, Alex Stamos, who was the CISO at Facebook and I think Yahoo, and a professor at Stanford who works on really hard problems. He just started tweeting about Zoom and the safety, and the CEO of Zoom pinged him, and now he's working with them, right? Like, so, so one of the brighter minds in our country on cyber, on adversary analysis and all that stuff now is working with Zoom. So again, I think the Zoom story is going to be reasonably fascinating as we sort of see this progress. So anyway, the next area of like noodling in my noodling is the history of infrastructure as code. So I'll give you a little sort of overview of this. So earlier this year, so let me give all the way back history. I gave a presentation at Configuration Manager Camp in Ghent back early this year. I think It was January, early February. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it's out there. And so this actually happened because last summer I tweeted. So there was a whole bunch of conversations going on about YAML, and the founder of Spring, what's his face, Rod Johnson, that wrote a blog article, said in defense of YAML, and what he really was sort of talking about how YAML has gone sort of nuts in 2019, right? And everybody was then going into all these discussions, and I started just thinking about the sort of arc of configuration management in general. So I just tweeted, I got 99 problems and a bash DSL ain't one of them, and I got a response back, said your CFP has been selected for the keynote for configuration management in 2020. And I thought it was a joke. Come to find out, it was Chris Byatt, and he's like, no. And I came and I gave this presentation. It was really fun, tongue in cheek. I talked about sort of early days Bash, my experience using sort of Bash on Sun machines, and then learning SMIDI on AIX, and then going into learning Puppet really early, going to work for Chef, and then working through sort of Docker, and how we're sort of almost, then we moved to YAML. Now we're kind of back to Bash as a DSL, right? Like, so it's like Bash all the way through, and then to ending with Bash, and so tongue in cheek, a lot of fun. But through this, I actually wound up meeting one of my heroes. And it is sort of, I got Mark Burgess, Luke Knies, Adam Jacob, and all sort of been my heroes, and all of my friends. But there was one that I've used his paper so many times, and I've talked about some of his modeling, and he sort of dropped out of the industry way back when. He had wrote a paper in 2002, Why Order Matters, Turing Equivalence in Automated System Administration, and he was so ahead of his time. But like Luke and certainly Mark had known him, but he sort of went into another area of work outside of IT. And just recently, we've gotten in touch with each other, and we started having these crazy conversations because he had been following me, and he saw some of my stuff about, sort of the three generations. I call them generations of infrastructure or configuration management. Is sort of divergences. So your shell script, or not even, people just handcrafting configuration. Convergence starts to get interesting with things like CF Engine, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, where you sort of have idempotency, you have this convergence, desired state. And then he was talking about a congruent model, and I'd always questioned, like, there was no product at that time that I thought was congruent. He actually, now in talking to him and having a couple of really interesting conversations, it was ISConf. And so he was actually one of the primary authors of ISConf. And so we get the grok on a whole bunch of cool stuff, and we've had about 3 1 hour, well, actually more than 1 hour, we get on a call, and it really sort of blow your mind and some of the stuff that we're going to try to work together on. But here's this thing about sort of declarative versus imperative, and he compares like Alonzo Church, lambda calculus as declarative, and Alan Turing as imperative, and that was really part of his paper. So you could see that ISConf was more of a sort of an imperative model, whereas something like CF Engine and ultimately Puppet would declare. It's a question where Chef is in this. So you can make the argument it's declarative in one sense, but I think mostly it is also imperative in that it is the Ruby language. My point is we're having this interesting. We're at the point of having this interesting discovery where Puppet is clearly declarative because the language is Puppet, where Chef, the language is Ruby, right? So anyway, I'm just trying to shake a tree branch of some interesting things. And what we agreed to do is, if we're going to do anything, and as you can see now, I've always got too many sort of fires in the iron, and that's what usually gets me in trouble. But so I'm like the ultimate, what's the dog and the squirrel? Squirrel, right? So, but in general, we're going to sort of complete the history. He added a whole level of history. I didn't really understand the ISConf versus CF Engine. Some of where Luke was. Luke Knies is an interesting actor because I always thought he started with CF Engine. He actually started, a little bit of lookup on Google could have told me I was ill-informed, but he actually was really working very closely with Steve early days on ISConf, and then sort of converted over to declarative model, and then the DAG and all, just really cool stuff. And then we'll talk about like, okay, given what we know now about all these models, is there sort of a model that looks for the future interesting? You've got obviously you got the Chef, Puppet, Ansible, you got Terraform, you got all different sort of cloud configuration tools, but now you have Pulumi and stuff. So what does this sort of next 10 years look like? I think is interesting. And then one of the things he's been thinking a lot about, which is sort of overlaps with adapt capacity and to be able to adaptive sort of skills liquidity, which is he just classifies as thinking about it as a decision-making problem. So again, we'll hopefully have some stuff that we'll put out together on that. And then finally, yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop here. I know this is a nasty teaser. And then leave this as, I'll do this. I'll just start here. So I won't go too far into this. So Jay Bloom, who I work with, has had this idea for a while, but he calls it the three economies. And it's really interesting. And there's a blog article, you can see it in his blog, so you can learn more about it. There's some other blogs that now have expanded on this. And he has an introduction to how he came up with the idea. And so it addresses this sort of the paradox that is actually DevOps, but just in general, you must accelerate, differentiate, and disruption in a market in order for our business units to succeed, right? So we must increase variety, but we must gain efficiencies by decreasing variety, right? Like that is the sort of DevOps. The Dev wants to go fast and differentiate. Ops needs to scale and centralize and reduce costs, or make things redundant, right? And so you have this sort of this core chronic conflict. Now in DevOps, we've sort of over the last 10 or 15 years addressed this so people can see this. But the idea so he brings in sort of Aspie's law, cybernetic, a British cybernetic psychologist, who basically, and this is where I'll end on the teaser, where it gets really interesting, where the sort of the key here is, so sort of Aspie's law is like, when the variety of complexity of the environment exceeds the capacity of a system, natural or artificial, the environment will dominate, only destroy the system, right? We know that, right? But the law, when you sort of apply this, in order to deal properly with diversity of problems, worlds it throws up, you have to have a repertoire of responses that are at least as nuanced as a problem. In other words, you need to sort of have the sort of the variation and the ability to consume the variation have to be in sync, or the ability to consume the variation, or it has to be better. And basically, means variety absorbs variety. So you look for things that basically. You look for a sort of a model where the consumption of the variety is not sort of taking away, not is where I get very unscientific, away from like the idea that sort of, I think the interesting one's like cows, if they feed grass, but if they eat all the grass, then like the ecosystem of the sort of raising cows dies, right? So you have to have sort of a system where it's in balance. And so the third economy, which Jabe talks about here, is differentiation and scope, or our scale, or classic. Scope is that thing. So anyway, I'll be driving more of that. Again, there's some really cool stuff, but I'm getting close to an hour, and I thought maybe you get Jabe on next week and we can talk, let him explain it, because he's way smarter than I am. So stop sharing. This is me again. Anyway, signing off for this week's set of noodlings, I guess. Like I said, next week I'll get my act together and we'll actually interview, hopefully either Andrew or Jay or some people, and I'll try to do the continued continued vendors. I've got some really cool startups that are friends of mine that I just want to get them to sort of tell their story. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, we're back here on TechStrong TV. Hope you enjoyed that interview. Sometimes you do those interviews and you wait a year or two, and like wine, fine wine ages with time. So do these interviews, because you can see how much of what the folks we were thinking back then, has come to pass now. So interesting stuff there. Please, hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to just listen to that, by the way, it is available up on YouTube, because it's before we started Digital Anarchist. So it's up on YouTube under our DevOps TV channel. So check that out. Next up, I wanted to talk about some of the news stories that are up on our Media Ops site today. As usual, I'm only going to give you a couple, but there's, on Security Boulevard alone, there's 40 or 50, maybe more, news stories every day, so check those out. And DevOps.com is probably 3 or 4 a day. Container General's 1 or 2 a day. So please do check them all out. But let me tell you what some of the highlights that I wanted to bring to your attention. First up on the Boulevard, Joan Goodchild, one of our regular authors, wrote an article about how cyber secure is your state. I mean, what we're seeing with this COVID thing is, in the absence of a kind of strong federal leadership, each state is kind of charting their own course, right? Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said California is going to be a nation state. Each state they're almost competing against each other, it seems, to buy medical equipment and protective gear. At the same time, each state has its own unique cyber challenges, and some are certainly more secure than others. So we're seeing the discrepancy, 50 different cybersecurity challenges, and each state has its own unique profile. And probably, truth be told, within the state you have municipality and county-to-county differences as well. But anyway, have a good read. It's a good article by Joan, and check it out, How Cyber Secure is Your State. Another one that I wanted to bring up was machine learning's role in safe live streaming. You know, this whole thing around safety and security in live streaming and video conferencing like Zoom and stuff like that has certainly captured everyone's imaginations. I don't think it should rise to the level of a congressional hearing. I think our Congress has more important things to do right now, frankly. But that being said, we've got a good article here by Lincoln Luck, who has submitted this, and I think it's a good one. Machine learning's role in safe live streaming. It's not meant to bash Zoom or anything like that, but the two main points of the article are that people aren't machines and efficiency and speed is essential. But do check out the article. I think it's worthwhile giving it a read. The next one I wanted to bring out is a little bit more geeky and technical for my friends who are into security and containers. And it's written by a couple of the folks over at Trend Micro, and it's titled, Why Running a Privileged Container is Not a Good Idea. And if you know what a privileged container is, you'll enjoy this article. If you don't, you may enjoy it anyway, though, because it'll give you a good idea of what it is and why you may not want to do it. And again, that's from Alfredo Oliveira and Fernando Cardoso, both over at Trend Micro. So give that one a check out. And then let's turn over. We've got 2 decent articles over on DevOps.com I want to bring to your attention. One is from our friend Don McVitie. Don, you know what? We don't talk about him enough. Don is someone who's been covering the technology space, not just covering, living the technology space for 20 plus years. And he's got a good new article up called In IT, Purity is Not Necessarily a Virtue. And I don't disagree with Don there, but he lays out a really good case for it as well. So do check out Don's latest article. And you should go check out some of the other ones Don's written. He's been writing some really good stuff lately as part of his research and experience. Next, I mentioned earlier that Mitchell will be doing a interview with Splunk. Mike Vizard also has a really good article up about Splunk adds a dashboard to track remote workforce metrics. And, again, this COVID stuff is top of mind for us all. people working from home is top of mind, and Splunk is brought out a solution to help remote, track your remote workforce metrics. So give a listen to give a read of Mike's article on that. I think you'll find it interesting. Also, we put up some new DevOps chats on Friday. You can check those out on DevOps Chat, and encourage you to do that. As I say, I'm just picking a half a dozen articles daily for you guys to look at. There's so much on our sites. Do check them out. We appreciate it. So many of the authors, everyone has something to say, and we try to set a big tent to give people a chance to say it. All right. I think that's going to wrap it up for the news today, Tuesday, April 14th. It's now that time of the show where we're going to turn things over to our managing editor, Mrs. Charlene O'Hanlon. And Charlene has Tom Patterson, Chief Strategy Officer at Unisys, on an interview today. Charlene, take it away.
Thanks, Alan. Welcome back to TechStrong TV, everybody. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I am on the Zoom today with Tom Patterson, who is Chief Trust Officer at Unisys. Is that correct?
That is the title, Chief Trust Officer. Nice to be here, Charlene.
Well, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today. I'd like to talk a little bit about this new work from home paradigm that we're living in these days. And I think it's amazing that companies have had to pivot from having a workforce that is pretty much I would say 90% or so working in offices to that same amount now having to work from home. And first of all, I applaud IT organizations for being able to do that. But from a security perspective, I'm sure that, obviously, nothing is 100% accurate. So let's talk a little bit about security in this new normal, if you will. So what are some of the things that maybe companies in their rush to get all of their workers set up to work from home, what are some of the things maybe they might have overlooked from a security perspective?
Yeah, it's such an important topic right now. So I thank you for having me on to talk about this. We're getting calls from all over the world. This is not just a U.S. thing or a technology thing. This is every industry in every country. Everyone's working from home,
Right. Exactly.
Trying to make it work. So the IT groups within organizations, whether the governments or private sector, have been extraordinarily taxed because they've not only been told to move from maybe at most 20% remote worker capability to, like you said, over 90%. They've been asked to do it overnight.
Right.
And plane flying while you completely reconfigure.
Right.
And one of the stark realities that IT departments have learned is that VPN infrastructure that they had built and that did remote was never built for the entire workforce
Right.
on all the time, trying to access everything in the organization. It was built for maybe 20% of your workforce that wanted to work remote, that had access to certain things in certain ways and could do those things pretty well. But that does not scale.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what IT departments are grappling with now. How do you scale from 20% of your employees working remotely to over 90% overnight?
Right.
And so some of the things that they're hitting now are VPN overload when they get there. There's just not enough concentrators. There's not enough lines. So that's one issue. But you bring up the security issue, which is really where my heart is right now. We focus at Unisys very much on resilience, operational resilience. And that's something that I think transcends security. As you pointed out, Charlene, security is never 100% right. You're never always perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But you can be always right with resilience. You can design your organization to be resilient in the face of anything. So while Unisys certainly didn't plan on a COVID pandemic worldwide,
Right.
nor did anyone else, the fact that we had been built for resilience allowed us to switch from about 15% remote workforce to 93% remote work, or to 93% of our people being remote in 48 hours without degrading our security whatsoever. because we built in these kinds of capabilities and technologies, some that we've developed and others that we just use, like, working in the cloud and things, and software as a service. So having, had that opportunity to be a resilient organization up front really gave us a head start in this crisis. But it's really an opportunity now for every company that's out there, every organization that's out there, not just to try and add some more VPN lines and hope for the best, but really take a look at how they can use this crisis, this real, visceral crisis that we're all in, how they can use this to emerge stronger at the end, how they can be one of the leaders coming out of this crisis. Because we will look back. There'll be a normal. There'll be a new normal, but there'll be a normal. And we'll be able to look back and say, did we use this opportunity to actually get better, to become more resilient to the next thing and the next thing and the next? So that's really where Unisys has focused its time now, and looking at some of the security issues about people working from home. So you mentioned a couple that were really important. When you're working from home, as we all are, you're on your home Wi-Fi, not on your hardened office Wi-Fi. Have you changed your password lately, or is it still the default one that came with the box or the service? If it is, people are driving up and down your street looking at what you're doing.
Yikes.
And that's a yikes. Also, if you have kids, if you have toys, if you have games that are all internet-based, if you bought a TV that's a smart TV, all these things are now sharing your work environment. And so when you VPN in, you're not only VPNing yourself into your office infrastructure, you're bringing all that garbage with you. And while it was a little bit of a risk at home, it's a much bigger risk to bring that to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think a lot of people are thinking about those IoT devices and all those other things that are connected to the network. So two things. What are some of the best practices, first of all, that maybe folks can do with their home networks to kind of, I don't want to say bulletproof them, but at least make them that much more secure for working from home and accessing the corporate network?
Well, I would tell you there's two areas where they can get better. One is at what people can do at home, and others what IT departments can do at the office. Let me take the first one you started with was what people can do at home. First off, you can absolutely do sort of an audit on what is electronically connected at home, knowing that if you are VPNing into your office, you are bringing all that with you. Right. So maybe switch off some things, change some passwords on some things, at least be aware of what else is going on. It's not just the streaming download that's causing you some corruption, but it's really a lot of these little devices like cameras and toys and games that generally have little to no security in them, that may have malware in them. A lot of them have been used for bots, to be part of a global botnet. They generally take after these little IoT devices and make them be bots. You don't want to contribute that. You don't want to give them access into your internet. So watch out for those at home. On the IT department side, there's actually a lot more you can do. Rather than going out and buying more concentrators and just exacerbating the security problem, because again, a VPN, which everybody uses now, all that does is encrypt it from point to point. So it's got it from here to here. But once it gets to your internet and into your office environment, your work environment, it then goes back into clear text and can do anything. So you're actually bringing lots of stuff into this network, which you would never have brought into an office. So in a more modern way, working from the cloud, software as a service, using things like that. We use something called microsegmentation, so that we assume that you don't just get in, but you get into an exact point. You get just to this app that you're trying to use. We know we've identified who you are. And it's this concept called zero trust. It's been talked about for about 5 years, and is too sort of hoity-toity, and you can't go out and buy a product for it, so maybe you don't like it. But zero trust is really the answer. This is where people should be looking today, to have always-on access for your employees. So you don't just give them a line into your office and say, go to it, because you don't know what else they're bringing with them. But instead, you have a zero trust methodology where you identify the person, you identify their level of access, and you give it right to that application. So I can work in this HR app, and I'm allowed to do this kind of a query, but not that kind of a query. All that is able to be set up instantly and easily. That's what we put in place in 48 hours, because we had capabilities and resilience in mind. That's the kind of thing we're out day and night. Unisys is talking to clients about how they can do that with their organization very quickly. And then again, they not only meet the needs of the COVID crisis, but then they are setting themselves up to emerge stronger when they come out of this and be a real leader.
Okay. All right, great. Actually, zero trust was my second thing that I was going to bring up, so I'm glad you beat me to it.
Nice.
So looking ahead then, what can organizations take away from this, this situation? I mean, obviously, this is a huge learning experience for them. Are there certain things that that organizations need to possibly keep in mind for the next time, and assuming that there will definitely be a next time? What are some of the main points that you would recommend companies take away from this experience?
Yeah, and a wonderful question to focus on here, Charlene, and that is really move beyond the concept of security and aim for resilience. Most companies measure their teams on how secure are we, how many breaches did we have, how many attacks do we have, how many did we repel. That's a chasing your tail type of an exercise. You just keep pouring money into it. You keep getting more and more smart people buying more great products, but you're always chasing that. You're never going to be 100% secure. Mm-hmm. You can go after resilience and do it successfully. And that's what I encourage boards of directors and executive leadership teams to be really pushing throughout the organization, that we need to keep producing widgets. We need to keep keeping the lights on. We need, whatever it is that we do, we need to keep being able to do that in the face of anything that's thrown at us. Again, nobody planned for a global pandemic, or not very many organizations plan for a global pandemic. Mm-hmm. But those that plan for, well, we're not going to be able to come to the office. Now, those are the groups that have just kept on working, that shifted to work from home, that let their workforce not only be at home, but be fully productive and fully secure at home. So when you look at resilience, and this is something that I've talked about a lot at the World Economic Forums in Davos over the past few years, it's one of their big watchwords is resilience. It's something that's really had been starting to pervade corporate America. Mm-hmm. Now I think with this COVID crisis, people are going to see this is that opportunity to get beyond security and really get into that larger business of what do we really want from security? We want to be able to keep operating. And so there's absolutely, so I think you're going to see greater use of the cloud. You're going to see greater use of software as a service. You're going to see greater use of advanced technologies like microsegmentation that deliver something called software-defined networking, SDN. Yep. I think that's something that's been coming. Unisys has been working on that with some of our critical infrastructure clients for years and deploying it. We actually have it deployed here in-house, which is, again, why we're able to move so quickly. But being able to take SDN and make it a reality, I think the companies that adopt that now and work towards that now are going to come out of this in having emerged much stronger.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, those are definitely words to live by, if you will. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with me. Great stuff. I appreciate the time, and I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you stay safe and sane.
Thank you. Same to you, and good luck with this great new network.
All right. Great. Thanks again. All right, guys, stay tuned. We'll be back with more TechStrong TV.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey, thanks, Charlene. Great interview. Thanks to Tom Patterson and the folks at Unisys. Let us now move over to Mitchell. Our own Mitchell Ashley, CEO, co-founder of Accelerated Strategies Group. He has 2 sessions today, Mitchell. One is his own, talking about what the recovery world will look like in terms of rich data. And then Mitchell is interviewing Rick Fitz, Splunk SVP GM IT Markets, about the remote work insights product that I referenced earlier in the news from Mike Vizard. So without further ado, let's turn things over to Mitchell Ashley in the Analyst Corner.
Thank you, Alan. I'd like to turn our conversation to the subject of data. I'm really talking about the impact that that can have within our organizations. Now, previously, in other segments, I've talked about the changing experiences, even new products, new offerings that businesses have created under the current conditions where there's low or no touch environments due to working at home, stay at home, lockdowns, etc. Also, there's a lot of interest, of course, in work at home, and we're doing some additional research right now with some pretty interesting results about employees' interest in working at home and what that might look like after the conditions of staying at home, work at home, lift due to coronavirus. There's a couple of resources that I would like to point you to today. One of them is an upcoming segment that we have on TechStrong TV today, and that's with Rick Fitz of Splunk. Now, Rick is SVP GM of IT Markets with Splunk, and he's going to be sharing some information about a new program they've created around remote work insights. So I think you'll find that conversation very interesting because it really speaks to how you can use data within your organization to uncover productivity, use, things like that. How is remote work working for your organization? And I suspect that's going to be valuable not just today, but also as some of those restrictions are lifted and we see some shifts in how people work. Now, thinking on a more global basis, there's really some interesting things that are happening. One is also with Splunk. I did a DevOps Chat podcast I'd point you to. It's available on the DevOps.com site. Just look for DevOps Chat. That was with Andy Mann, also with Splunk, where they'd commissioned a report by ESG called The Global Value of Data, really looking at what organizations are effective, highly effective, less effective at using and creating value, business value, including an impact to the bottom line through data. Now, ESG did a great job. A really nice report, really nice research on this. I thought it was very well done. Some interesting things also came out of that. If you haven't kind of followed that topic of using data in the enterprise, but there's, of course, the search for dark data, data that you don't know about, you haven't discovered yet. How do you find it? How do you do that investigation and operationalize that data to make effective decisions, data-driven decisions, speed, real-time cost, real-time actions, cost elimination, things like that. Reason why I use those 2 examples from one company, in this case Splunk, is it represents this overall shift by an organization, a product company, really moving from data ops, using data as an operational tool, into how do you create applications and ultimately drive revenues from that data. Now, thinking about this also from an economic standpoint, none of us know what the recovery for the US or other countries is going to look like, more or less globally. And there's different predictions about whether that will be a sharp V, soft V, a rolling, gradual, maybe some steps forward, step back. Let's hope not, but we really don't know. I think what's interesting happening on a more global basis was an announcement that happened last week with Rolls-Royce. And they announced an initiative through their R2 data labs, where they're assembling an alliance of leading companies across commerce, banking, travel, technology, and research for how to use data analytics to find new and practical ways both to respond to the virus, but also looking for leading indicators and data that can help organizations move through and into the recovery as economies recover. One of the directors there, Carolyn Gorski, described it this way. She said that they're bringing together data sets from all across industry that have not usually been accessible to the public domain. So something interesting that we haven't seen before. They're calling this program Emergent, EMER2, GENT. And part of this also is how do you get organizations to work together where you've got to provide some fundamental capabilities. One is to share data securely. You've got to anonymize it, take information out of it, desensitize it, privacy restriction, things like that, of course. But in order to share this, that requires a lot of technology, both of discovering, using, and analyzing the data, and of course, how they're delivering it across organizations. So keep an eye for that kind of thing happening. I think we may get some useful insights out of that or other kind of programs. Matter of fact, we're even seeing other programs already announced similar to it. There was an initiative in the UK, the Alan Turing Institute, so that they were participating in a similar kind of initiative. So I think we'll see more of that happening, both across companies, but also think about it within companies. Maybe business units collaborating more productively together, sharing data, product lines, things like that. As we search for new ways within a business of how we might respond and create new interactions and experiences for customers that continue or bring new revenue streams to our organizations. I think we can look for insights from things happening on a more global, larger basis, as well as within our own organizations. Wish you the best in using data to help you, your customers, and of course your employees too.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Well, I'm very excited to have someone who I've built a good relationship with over the past few years, Rick Fitz, who's SVP GM of IT Markets Group at Splunk. Rick, good to be talking with you.
Thanks, Mitch. Good to talk to you as well.
We've done this over Zoom before, but not because we had to.
We are definitely socially distancing right now, Mitch.
We are. Well, we are socially distancing. So we're talking about something that you announced, I think it was back towards the end of March, Splunk Remote Work Insights, talking about all this, we're all living the work remote, work from home. Some of us have been doing it for some time, and for other folks, it's a brand new experience, a kind of forced experience, obviously. So tell us about Remote Work Insights and what the inspiration was, and also kind of what you're attempting to do, what the goal, mission is behind it.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to share this with your listeners. We have a number of customers who actively monitor their collaboration environments, their distributed environments, their networks, etc. But in this time literally within weeks, we asked employees to start working remotely. It's put a lot of strain on IT organizations. And in doing so, it's the kind of common questions that are asked is like, well, this is great. How's the experience with the employees? And then quickly someone asks, well, how many employees are actually connected to our network, or how many people are actually interacting? And then finally you get into conversations with, well, are they productive? Are they able to communicate and collaborate? And so this concept we were asking these same questions inside of Splunk, and we were hearing this from a lot of our customers as well. And we started to hear how they were solving this problem using Splunk. So this application, which by the way is an app that is available to existing Splunk customers that can be downloaded. It's actually on the Git repository. You can find it on our website. And they can apply it to their existing instance, or you can have us spin up a cloud instance for you. So if you're new to Splunk and just simply don't have the infrastructure in place, or you're an existing customer don't have the infrastructure in place, we can spin up a cloud instance for you. And we're actually giving that away as a trial for 90 days for free so that people can kind of get their hands on this. But those questions came into play, and it was like, well, wait a second, get data into Splunk from all these various different sources. So things like, the Microsoft's 365 suite, get information from your VPN, get information from perhaps a Teams aspect of Microsoft, or perhaps Zoom that we're using today, and try to get a sense of what's going on out there. and pay attention to. And so this application effectively has the dashboards and the content that makes that possible. So super excited about it. It's already getting a lot of traffic out there from a lot of the various downloads, and it's only been out for a couple of weeks, but we actually anticipate continually refreshing this as we learn more from other customers and what they're trying to do with the product or capabilities. So it is kind of exciting.
Very interesting. Now, is the goal primarily driven around productivity, or is it driven around what activities people are doing? Not necessarily the individual work activity, but are they spending time on these apps, or what are they using?
Yeah, I think originally it was just people were curious about asking really easy questions that, that you wouldn't think, like, well, great, we just had everybody move to their homes. Now they're interacting with their systems remotely over some form of a VPN or some other connected experience. How's that working? And so some of the early questions were just really rudimentary. Has traffic increased? Has traffic increased in your Slack environment? Are people really collaborating? And is there any correlation to that behavior that we're seeing as far as productivity is concerned? So the productivity questions are starting to come in now. And so more of these questions come up. People are pretty innovative out in our install base. They're like, well, here, I built this dashboard that kind of answers that question. And as we see those things pop up, we'll incorporate them into this application so we can distribute it out to everyone else. But the very first thing that was asked was simply, wow, VPN traffic's increased. What does that mean? Or has it increased?
Yeah.
Are people actually working out there? We're worried, right? And so that was kind of the fundamental, very quick questions that were asked. But now we're kind of moving into productivity questions.
Yeah, it makes sense, because I think about sort of the progression we've all gone through. Many of the states went through their stay in place, stay at home kind of process, orders in similar timeframes. And it felt like there was an initial, I need to get my bearings again, kind of that first week of what is this, whether it's how you work at home or your business, how you run your business and what's happening. So it sounds like maybe the first thing is just get our bearings, what's happening, what are people doing, or, if traffic is going up, is it Netflix going through our network, or is it, people doing much more video conferencing or Salesforce or so as you mentioned, Slack, other kinds of work.
Yeah, or Teams or anything, because I mean, now you're really asking the question, well, are people able to communicate? Now, we're a tech company, so I can tell you personally, I spend now at least 12 hours a day on Zoom. I'm starting to become pretty comfortable with this engaging medium, but I do miss the fist bump and the cup of coffee, which is something that we'll probably get back to in the new norm. But ask that question at 60,000 employees, like you're saying, well, wait, are we able to complete our mission? And you kind of get uneasy about that when you first ask that question, because you're like, well, how would we even answer that? Because, there are so many different options now for getting access to, people can use their mobile devices, for example, to conduct business. They can use their laptops. So how do you actually ask that question, whether people are productive? And so I think that's kind of the next evolution of this. Now, of course, that makes the one thing that's always primary mission of most organizations through these types of crises is employee safety. So, that's the first mission. The second one is, now how do we make sure people are able to complete their jobs or their tasks if they're in a remote setting?
I know this is an offering for customers, potential customers. Could you talk a little bit about maybe what you've learned or that you have kind of gathered, collected about your own? You mentioned Splunk working and being a technology company. I'm just curious if there's some insights, lessons that you've learned as a company other people might benefit from.
Well, I think it really, for us, quickly, as we got a handle on, okay, everybody now, worldwide is. One thing to point out about Splunk, our sales organization has always been kind of a home office model. We don't have central locations. They're out talking to customers. So the intent was they're always engaging customers. They typically work from their home or their car or remotely. And so we had a good number of our employees that were already connected into our enterprise this way. So we certainly had the infrastructure. But I have to tell you, the one thing that was interesting that came up very early, and this was feedback from our customers, and I'm certain this is true of other enterprises, is like, my home is not set up to be an office. So how can you help me? And that was both some technical challenges, like I don't have network bandwidth to do my job very well. So how can you help me? And so we had to help provide advice and suggestions there. And then we actually put in a policy where we can say, you know, an expense policy allowed you to expense certain elements of your environment. And things like, you know, I don't have a desk, or, you know, first few weeks, I actually had employees when I was talking to them on the phone, they were working in the garage. One person was working in the closet. So it's like, I was like, well, I understand. And he goes, yeah, you have to understand. I have 3 kids, young kids, and they're active, and I have to try to find a place that's quiet. So it definitely changed things. So we made some real quick policy changes, and then from a technical perspective, making these observations about the connectivity and things like that, we can actually advise people. And certain, you know, not everybody's technical, so they don't understand that Zoom is slow because your wireless is slow in your home, right? Or perhaps they don't understand that it's the internet bandwidth is fine, but it's your wireless network, or, you know, that those discerning those 2 different things are some of the stuff that our technical teams helped out with.
Well, it's serendipitous you mentioned that, because we're doing some research. Accelerated Strategies Group is doing research on COVID-19 and how that's affected IT organizations. We just did a flash poll survey. The number 1 issue was performance reliability of online meetings. Second and third were in-home Wi-Fi and my ISP. So,
yeah.
And not everyone, as you point, not everyone understands, you know, the issue may not be Zoom or GoToMeeting, it might be your Wi-Fi, et cetera. So now those are things that IT organizations are triaging, or at least trying to help.
Yeah, and imagine if you're a finance professional and you're spending literally 90% of your day in an ERP application, a very complex, heavy app, right? And, you know, it's just hard for you to get your job done. It's hard for you to complete the task, plus all the other distractions in your life that are going on. And so making sure that you can make observations about those experiences are critically important. And I think you'll see, even in our remote work insights capability, you'll see over time more of that end user information is going to be useful, and from a response time perspective, what that experience is. And I think you'll see some evolutions there as well.
So have you seen from this, beyond the settling in period of, okay, everybody's working remotely and kind of getting set up, and how do I manage and monitor this? Have you seen a shift in the kind of questions or information that customers are looking to gain from remote work insights? What are they looking for next? Is there a kind of progression to this, or are we still kind of letting the dust settle?
Oh, it's very early. I mean, we released it on March 31st, so it's just a few days in. But our customers and Splunk customers are not shy, so we're gonna hear a lot, and they'll probably fork it. Again, it's publicly available, so it's on the Git repo, and they'll fork it and they'll add value to it and kind of morph it. And so we'll just kind of watch how the community does adopt it. Mitch, one trend that I did want to tell you, because it's a little bit different than just remote insights, but this has directly impact on what's going on with IT operations. We are getting a huge number of inquiries on just, you know, now my NOC is distributed. I have a distributed NOC, and it's people working from home, and I need some help. And so this week we're actually announcing as well a 90-day free trial for 100 seats of VicDrop. So people can actually set up a virtualized network environment or operations center, and can get notifications and engagement through their mobile devices in conjunction with their laptops. But it is kind of interesting to see who would ever thought that the infamous NOC, the classic NASA screens with all the workstations, every manager's dream, would actually be now employees working remotely. And so that's also another shift that we're seeing, and I'm anxious to see how that one's going to play out over the next few months, because I anticipate that being kind of a long-term trend.
Oh, I do too. Yeah, I would expect that kind of thing to be the new norm of why do you always need to bring people back together in one location unless it really makes sense to, and plus who knows what might ramp up later in the year for reoccurrences of COVID. So we may be in varying ways back at, you know, doing some of this again. I hope not, but you have to kind of plan for those contingencies. So that's really interesting from a NOC perspective. And I know operations is your passion, and I've heard you speak, and you and I've talked before, which is awesome, because operations does need a voice, and it's always good to have a helpful voice to that. what's the shift from a distributed NOC look like when you're used to, let's bring all the disciplines together into one location with the, as you mentioned, the nice monitors and glass. What are some of the demands or impacts of trying to make it distributed that groups have to force it? And I know a bit of the VictorOps folks and their history, and that's SRE has been a big focus of theirs. So the clearly would be in your acquisition of VictorOps, well suited to that kind of environment.
Well, what's interesting is I'm seeing the philosophical change, and I thought perhaps this, what led us to go down the VictorOps path at Splunk was because I thought it was really important to think about incident response a lot differently. Incident response is where people should really swarm an issue and bring all the people that are necessary to get that problem resolved as quickly as humanly possible. I mean, that in essence is what we're trying to do is respond to those incidents. And I think the DevOps community actually got it right. I think they rightly realized that if you put developers on call, they're in a good position to understand because the application is usually at the heart of the thing, and it's able kind of to triage where to go look for problems. And they're in a really good position to call people, bring people in to the war room, as it were, to actually work with each other. How they bring people in is through Slack, it's through other means. They don't necessarily want to call humans. They want to engage people through other means. But that in essence is what that same behavior now is kind of like, well, wait a second, this is the way the whole world has to go. And I think it's just being accelerated because of this, because you're going to get an alert that there's a problem, but are you in the best position to actually resolve the problem? Perhaps not. There's some investigation that has to occur. There's some slacking back and forth with other people. But how do you actually collect all that data in one place and use it as an asset to learn over time? And so I think that is something that was I think that's just going to accelerate now, that kind of that trend. But we're also seeing what's interesting is VictorOps was they focused on developer, but I would say probably half of our customers are actually doing operations, and so that's always also nice to see. Is it's definitely that trend is definitely picked up.
Well, their timing was perfect for the DevOps. Is it all shifting to Dev? No, there's still an operations element of DevOps. It's a combination of that. So
well, the roles sometimes I think people forget that the developer just happens to be the quarterback, philosophically, and then the other people still have to engage. A developer doesn't necessarily care about infrastructure. It should be just free. It should just work. Networks just
when
work.
I need it, be free. Exactly.
They treat it as a service, and so, but those other service providers that are providing the service are the ones that ultimately have to fix things. And so, getting that engagement right, getting the right people engaged in a war room scenario is really critically important in these times.
It's interesting just to step back for a minute for Splunk, with the announcement, the release of Remote Work Insights, and also you just released a report recently. I talked with Andy Mann on a podcast about the value of data, which was really fascinating. We had a great discussion, some really good insights from that report. Going back to even when I attended the .conf conference for Splunk, where you were talking about how, I think it was Porsche had created some applications. You bringing all this all this data together, and which is part of what digital transformation is about, is really leveraging the technology, harnessing it in ways to let you do business a different way, more competitively, new offerings, that kind of thing. It seems like that is a big focus. Yeah, I heard that message at the conference, and seeing more things coming out from Splunk. It wasn't just a nice tagline at the conference. It seems like that it really is a big focus of yours, of how do you extract value out of the data to be able to do things differently, do more things, gain insights.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting about Splunk is over time, people have realized that, wow, they are really a data company. I mean, that's who we are. And that was, I've been with the company about 5.5 years now, and that's what attracted me to the company in the first place, because I felt pretty strongly that most IT problems could be easily solved if you could get access to the right information. And it's always been a challenge to get the right information to actually do anything about it. And it's been probably 30 years of frustration for a lot of people when you can't fix a problem. Because I can tell you that nobody in IT is sitting around saying, I just don't want to solve this problem. Like they're good people and they want to effectively have the data at their fingertips to solve really complex issues. And so when Splunk built this, we couldn't come out and say, hey, we have this data platform, everybody jump in. We had to very methodically go after specific problems and solve them and show that you can apply data to these problems, whether it's a monitoring problem, whether it's a troubleshooting problem, or if it's a specific piece of infrastructure or a service in the cloud. Those things are kind of how we chipped away at it. But at the end of the day, we're bringing data to really any type of question, any type of investigation, and we're trying to really empower you to take a data-driven approach to solving problems.
It's I wonder too, as organizations are examining their business, some are focusing on liquidating to get cash, make sure they've got plenty of things to operate. Others are focusing on maybe shifting their business slightly or maybe significantly to be able to offer services in a world where we're not in front of each other or next to each other. Others are, of course, dealing with maybe some layoffs and things like that. It's a different time. Do you have any thoughts on the role data might play in as we rebuild, as we re-innovate who we are, our companies, our strategies? Having that data there and having such a disruptive situation could make that data extremely useful for going back and saying, let's not rebuild the supply chain the way we did it. Look, here's the data that says we could speed this up much more quickly by reconstructing it a different way. Just picking an example out of thin air, but it seems like that data could be extremely valuable.
Yeah, it is, and it is. I've always said that people often think about Splunk as a repository of technical data coming from systems, but I think we forget that people's interactions with those systems are also incredibly valuable, and they're inside of the data we collect as well. And that human activity is lets you do things what you just described, which is give you some insight into, well, are people actually using this? Are they completing a given set of processes? Are they able to actually complete a business outcome in this way? And those insights are actually useful because then it brings data to the problem and it gives you insight that says, you know what, that wasn't high value like we thought. It kind of eliminates the human bias that's often involved with somebody who perhaps spent their whole career picking a piece of technology and using and leveraging that technology, and they become very protective of it because they feel, I should say, that it still provides a certain service to the enterprise. But if you can bring data to it, it starts to reduce that guesswork and starts to bring real information at people's fingertips, so you can actually action it. And if you will, sometimes I refer to it as like actionable intelligence. And that is something that is really powerful. And I think you pointed out that during this time, during these transformational periods where, well, I say it's transformational in the sense that businesses have the opportunity to do transformations at this time, so that every business leader will talk about this is the time to actually start working towards, because when this ends, we got to be in a stronger position as a company. And bringing data so that they can make really informed decisions around their operations is I think, critically important, so that they can make better business decisions.
I think it is potentially a huge advantage for speeding recovery, speeding transformation strategies that now have transformed a different way, being able to react much more quickly. So speaking of which, last time we talked, I think was more towards the end of 19, heading into 20. A lot of activity around SignalFX and your acquisition of Omnition, which was a very curious one to me because you kind of snatched them up before they'd even come out of stealth, and I happened to be lucky enough to know about them. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in microservices. I think you've had some things happen there, right?
Yeah, I kind of foreshadowed. I told everybody that we were going to take that product capability and integrate it into our SignalFX, platform capability. And the teams are just amazing. I have to say, I'll give a lot of kudos and thanks to the teams that did this work, because they not only did it, but they did it in kind of record time. So we just announced last week, actually, at the end of the month, the availability of microservices APM, which is the converged product capability around SignalFX and Omnition. And so we're out in the wild and we're selling. And so that's great to see. And for your listeners that don't necessarily know what that is, it's kind of it's a technology that collects all the information from open tracing and takes that information at full fidelity and derives a logical topology of your application and pinpoints where in the stack a particular problem is occurring. So is it my application? Is it a backend problem? Is it a front-end problem? And that logical topology, of course, is critically important to troubleshooting complex application environments that are built at scale. So we're excited about having it, and it's a completely data-driven approach to solving kind of some long-standing problems built in a big data way, which I'm happy that we're staying true to who Splunk is.
I think that will be one of the fascinating things for me to, and probably for others to really see and understand is it's not just two different kinds of monitoring capabilities coming together into a new monitoring system. You've built this, you've really invested into integrating it into the underlying Splunk platform to be really data driven, so you really have access to all that information that you've been collecting, not just here's events that are happening and someone needs to do something, or here's information to help you triage a problem in production. That's got to be a very different mindset to take those kinds of tools and really rebuild it under a data driven fabric.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it gets back to, if you talk to anybody that's in more of an SRE role or something like that, they'll always say, hey, I need 3 types of data. I need trace information, I need metrics, and I need the ability to actually not only stitch those things together, but I need to connect it to the root cause, which is normally stored in a log. And sometimes metrics are extracted from logs, or maybe they're extracted from another data source, or perhaps even developers are throwing off metrics, which is kind of that. This is the seminal shift to observabilities, where we have actually asked developers to put in more information into their code so that we have the ability to make observations about it. But taking that and putting it in one place and running at scale with rich sets of analytics across it, so you can pinpoint where a problem resides. Because remember, this data it's a lot. There's a lot of information, and the one thing you don't want to do is just simply sort through pieces of information. No human can do that. So you've got to apply some form of machine learning capabilities. You need to make observations that are kind of streaming by, so you can make very fast and quick decisioning. And then take that information and use it as a way to find a root cause and kind of resolve a problem. But let's not forget that that's only part of the solution. The other part is connecting a person into the resolution process and making sure that they're informed of what can actually occur. And that's kind of the combination of SignalFX, Omnition, what we've done with VictorOps, and then of course Splunk underpinning all that. So bringing that into a common user experience and letting people do their jobs and do them well is certainly something that was in our vision, and I'm happy to say we made a huge step towards that vision this last week.
It's nice to see when acquisitions work. Exactly. That's a challenge in and of itself.
Yeah.
Well,
always start with people. Make sure you got people
does.
right, and make sure the tech is right and the architecture is sound. And if you got good talent, it does help a lot. It does
bring it together. Wonderful. Well, exciting news about the Splunk Remote Work Insights, and also about microservices APM. A lot of good stuff happening at Splunk. Been great to talk with you as always, and hope we have some fun things to catch up on next time we get together.
Yeah, me too, Mitch. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me. It's been my pleasure.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DEVSECOPS, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. 2 great segments, as usual, from Mitchell over in the Analyst Corner. The ASG team is just on fire. Books coming out, reports, they're all over, not just on MediaOps properties. Helen Beale is doing a DevOps show regularly on another provider, and it's not on purpose. Maybe it's Freudian. I can't remember their name right now, but it's a once every 2 weeks thing. Bob Resselman, if I haven't brought it out yet, his Adventures in Microservices is a great microservices. This new sort of comics he's launched, and I really would like you to check that out. It's up on Security Boulevard. Good work on the ASG team by everyone there, Gary, Sanjeev Sharma, the rest. Anyway, let's wrap things up for today, though. I hope you've enjoyed our show. We try to, keep it moving, keep it interesting. I hope you guys are all staying well and healthy and getting a little exercise as well. We'll be back tomorrow with another full series of interviews and so forth. And we look forward to seeing you then. Until then, though, this is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. Stay well, stay healthy, stay strong.